morning, everyone, and welcome to Brazil Climate Summit Paris 2025. My name is Bernardo Porto Valadares, and I am an MBA student at INSEAD. On behalf of our entire team here, I'm delighted to welcome you all, both our audience here and those joining online. Here we're going to have a great session today. Before we begin, I'd like to go over a few guidelines. This event is fully booked, so we kindly ask you not to reserve seats in the auditorium. Due to time constraints, there will be no Q&A session. Wi-Fi is free, and the password is next to the coffee station right outside. This event is being live streamed, so feel free to share the link from our website with anyone unable to attend in person. After the coffee break, we will have our roundtables. If your badge has a green sticker on it, you are signed up for the theme reforestation. If your badge has a red sticker on it, you may go to the hydrogen room. The rooms are both in the same floor, and they have signs at the door in front of it. But anyways, please make sure you go to the room before the station starts, and our team is also available to assist you. The BCS reception will follow the event 6 p.m., and we'll be happy to chat and celebrate 2025's edition BCS Paris. And finally, please feel free to take photos and share them on social media tagging at Brazil Climate Summit. Now that we have covered the essentials, I'm thrilled to see such a great audience gather here today. Together, we will explore Brazil's leadership in climate solutions and its potential to serve as a global hub for climate innovation. I hope we can leave this summit inspired, energized, and committed to action. Last but not least, I want to thank you, our sponsors and partners who made this day possible. Ativus, Vale, A10 Invest, Sigma Lithium, Arapiaú, and Hoffman Institute. And to start the day, I'd like to invite INSEAD Deans Francisco Veloso to welcome you all to Brazil Climate Summit.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's absolutely delighted to be here today representing INSEAD as the academic partner. It's my second time. So, well, I didn't start all that much before as a dean, and so it would be difficult to be before that. It's also the second time we're having here. And I'm here because it is important. And it is important because of what we do, and it's important because of what Brazil is doing and what can do more. And this is precisely on the back of what you were saying, and that I'll talk to about, how Brazil is doing so many interesting things that it's worthwhile for us to reflect, to think, and to push forward. And this is a particular year, let's put it this way, in terms of the role of Brazil on climate change and on pushing for a more sustainable world. And, business schools have a very important role to play. Often we think about how, what are the new solutions for climate and how we're going to implement them. And of course, a lot of them have a technical element. But when we think about, climate and sustainable solutions that can have impact the world, we need scale, we need organization, we need deployment. And we cannot do that without management, without leadership, without financing, without marketing, without a lot of things that business schools, know how to do and can contribute to. And so if we think, and that's certainly the view that INSEAD has, that we need to head our world into a more sustainable journey, we need to be at the forefront of identifying, deploying, and communicating those solutions. And that's why we're here, and that's why we're doing these also in partnership to think about what we can do together, and what we can do together, not only in terms of what happens in Brazil, but how you can connect Brazil to other parts of the world, and in this case, to connect it to Europe, to try to find, ways to push this agenda forward. And, this is quite important for us and something that we're doing here, but we're also doing in a few other ways. And I'll mention that in a second. But before doing that, I do want this to also congratulate. I mean, this is a 100% student-led initiative, and I want to really very much thank and congratulate the students for the determination, the passion, the drive to really put it together, invite the speakers, bring everybody here, organize, and for how you firmly believe on how we can, working together, make a difference for the planet and have INSEAD, be at the heart of that transformation. And I also want to thank, of course, the help that we're having throughout INSEAD to make it happen. While I get the honor of opening these, it's the team that pushes it forward, and certainly Philippe Montero sitting right there, and also Cattell and Maria and the Hoffman Institute, have also been instrumental to put it together. Not to speak, of course, about the fact that we have many of our alumni that are coming here to contribute to these, including Marcelo Paiva, MBA 03, Bruno Serapião, MBA 02, Antonio Uras, MBA 97, and of course the Alumni Association of Brazil, and the partners that at Visa that are really helping to push us forward, and of course many other alumni that are here. And this is important, as I was saying, because Brazil is already in many instances doing phenomenal projects that is important for the world to understand, but also there are things that are happening elsewhere in the world that can be brought to Brazil. And this is the opportunity for us to discuss and to talk about those and to find the opportunities to connect. And this is particularly important this year because of COP30 and the road to COP30. I mean, INSEAD has had a long relationship with Brazil for many years, a very active alumni community, almost 2,000, right? And Antonio, you something, give or take, and there are a number that's been growing every year. We continue to have a very strong participation, and of course that would not be possible to have that determination if we didn't have a strong community that would be contributing there. And this summit is timely because it happens a few months before the COP summit. And precisely because we believe that this is making a difference, that we want to push it forward in important ways. So in September, and it's not just what's going to happen around COP. In September, we're going to be at Station F with the Advanced Management Program, to talk about what are we doing with Brazil. We're then going to be partnered with Dom Cabral to do something back in Brazil around the COP, first in September right here, but then in October in Brazil, where we want to, and we are partnering with the Fundação Dom Cabral to do something in São Paulo as part of our Global Executive MBA Key Management Challenge initiative that we have over there, and around which we're going to do a variety of initiatives. And I was already talking with Antonio and with Bruno about how we can combine it to do also things within our alumni community. And this connection that we have to Brazil, is not just about the past and the present, but it's also about the future. We've started this year an important collaboration with Suzano that is supporting a variety of projects related to sustainability, both on the climate side, but also how do we create a more shared prosperity together. And we had, for example, Karel and Subi that were two of our faculty members that were just in Brazil last couple of weeks to explore what we can do there. Henrik Grev is working with Marcelo and writing a case study on A10, which is a very nice step to show some of the wonderful initiatives that are happening there. And our case on WEG will be launched later this year, also on our our journey to COP30. And so you can see that there's a lot of initiatives. This is one instance of that initiative, but it's really something that is a commitment of INSEAD to a more sustainable world, to our connection to Brazil, both historically, but more importantly to what we're doing now and what we want to do in the future. And to close, I'd like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the Brazilian Chamber of Commerce and the Brazilian Embassy, who have been integral partners in putting this together and in our collaboration with Brazil. And we're honored to join them here. And we have Philippe Lecourtier, President of the Chamber of Commerce of Brazil in France, and France's former ambassador to Brazil here to support us as well. So thank you all for coming. Thank you for the speakers and the contributors. Delighted to be here. Congratulations again to the students for the initiative, and I wish everybody a wonderful afternoons of discussions, reflections, and very, very importantly, road to COP, but more importantly even, a road to action. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the partnership, Dean Francisco. It's a true honor to be one of the students here, the team, representing INSEAD as co-organizers, as well as Brazil Climate Institute. Now I'd like to call Jorge Argrave, Director at Maraé Investments and co-founder of Brazil Climate Summit. Please, Jorge.
Bonjour, good afternoon, everyone. It's a great pleasure to welcome you here once again in this beautiful city for the second Brazil Climate Summit Paris. It's hard to believe it's been already 4 years in this journey since we began organizing this type of gatherings, starting in New York and last year doing our first edition here in Paris. These are spaces for dialogue and connection between Brazilians and global citizens about one question: how can Brazil's private sector contribute the most as a global solution for the climate crisis? This marked our second edition here in Paris, and we want to make this an annual tradition together with the students of INSEAD. I'm very happy to see many familiar faces who were here last year, but also delighted to see many new ones, which means that our community of exchange is growing and therefore becoming more impactful. This is a very important year for Brazil because of COP30, but also for the Brazil-France relationships. It's the year of Brazil in France and the year of France in Brazil. And I hope this event can contribute meaningfully for the climate collaboration between our countries and between Brazil and Europe more broadly. Before we continue, I'd like to extend my deepest gratitude to INSEAD for hosting us, for our sponsors, the speakers, who have agreed to be here very generously, and especially to the organizing team. All of the students that you see with a white t-shirt, they are part of a very hardworking team, passionate about the topic. They're mostly INSEAD MBA students, and they're truly the heart and soul of these initiatives. So beyond that conversation, sparking the climate conversation with the students is something that really moves us to be here. This summit, at its core, is about building connections between our countries, our organizations, and most importantly, about our people. It's about sparking the energy we need to act and collaborate deeply and boldly. And if there's one force that can ignite connection and mobilize people like nothing else, for me, it's collective sports. In the case of Brazil and France, that common passion is football. Yes, there is rivalry, I have to admit. France has been a tough World Cup adversary since 1998. But I want to focus on what unites us through football. And that brings me to someone very special who is with us here today. Someone who embodies the powerful connection between France and Brazil. And it's an honor to welcome Hai, or Hai for the French. Hai is one of the most admired football players in Brazil, having built a legendary career in São Paulo, my beloved team, and the Brazilian national squad. It's enough to say that he was world champion with both, club and country. Between 1993 and 1998, Hai made history in France, leading Paris Saint-Germain through one of its most successful eras. And he is typically named among the greatest players of PSG's history. But Hai is much more than an athlete. He has dedicated decades to important social impact work in Brazil and has played a central role in strengthening the cultural and human ties between France and Brazil over nearly 3 decades. No one personifies the France-Brazil connection better than Rai, in my opinion. On a more personal note, Rai, you've been part of my childhood. So I still remember your goals in Tokyo against Barcelona, and I was in stadium in 1998 when you came back from France to play in the final game against Corinthians, our worst rival. So, in fact, you are one of the reasons I almost pursued the career of a football player instead of being an economist. I'm grateful I didn't. But with that, I really would like to thank you all for being here. Wish you an inspiring and fruitful conference. Now, please join me in welcome Rai. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's a very pleasure to be here. Sorry, at that time I'm going to switch to French. I can speak Portuguese if you prefer, but well, as I was presented, I used to play football. I was in the national team in 1994. We were world champion with our São Paulo, and I'm very proud of my career, but not more about, to be a symbol of this relationship between France and Brazil. Now I'm going to speak in French a little bit. Je crois que quand on parle de thèmes si urgents, je vais aussi essayer de mobiliser aussi le milieu sportif pour ça. Moi, j'ai une association, comme on a dit, qui s'appelle Go de Lettra. I have an NGO, a charity called Go de Lettra, il y a déjà depuis presque 30 ans. Et nous, on se met de plus en plus dans le thème. Cette année, moi, je vais faire une immersion dans l'Amazonie. J'ai déjà Eliane Brown, une spécialiste qui va m'aider à faire une immersion à l'Amazonie pour se mettre de plus en plus dans le thème, parce que c'est quelque chose d'urgent et tout le monde, toutes les institutions, toute la mobilisation, toute la société civile doit s'y mettre. Je suis très heureux de voir et très optimiste de voir des étudiants, des jeunes qui prennent la main ces thèmes. Et je crois qu'il n'y a pas de solution sans le Brésil et la France. La France comme un des grands représentants de l'Europe, le Brésil comme un grand, peut-être le plus grand représentant de l'Amérique latine, mais surtout deux pays qui résistent et qui essaient de résister fortement dans les valeurs humaines, dans la valeur de la vie, dans la valeur de la science, de l'éducation. Et je crois que si jamais ces deux pays ne se mettent pas ensemble, parce qu'aujourd'hui, tous les thèmes deviennent universels, globaux. C'est pour ça qu'on est content de voir ici des représentants, des événements un peu partout dans le monde, parce qu'il n'y a pas de solution non plus sans qu'on se mette ensemble. Et je crois que le Brésil et la France, maintenant qu'il y a une bonne entente, maintenant qu'on a une année des saisons croisées entre le Brésil et la France, je crois que ça peut être un symbole d'un changement des comportements et surtout de renforcer cette résistance des deux pays pour des valeurs humaines, pour les valeurs pour la vie, les valeurs pour la planète. Et qu'avec la COP, ça va être une grande opportunité pour renforcer l'importance du Brésil et aussi renforcer l'importance de cette amitié entre France et Brésil. Tout à l'heure, je dois partir parce que je vais à un événement qui c'est Paris-Plage, ça va être la couleur de Brésil. Il va y avoir le lancement. Moi, je suis le parrain de Paris-Plage, Brésil à Paris. Il va y avoir des terrains de sport aussi en face de la mairie. Maintenant, ils appellent la forêt urbaine à la mairie. Donc, on espère que ces genres de gestes puissent changer aussi tout un comportement et qu'on puisse être de plus en plus optimiste, comme je suis aujourd'hui, en étant ici. Merci beaucoup pour l'invitation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hai, for being part of our mission to bring light to Brazil as a climate solution hub. My name is Natalia Miller, and I'm an MBA student at INSEAD. It is an honor to welcome all of you to this special keynote session. We are living in a pivotal moment for global climate diplomacy. With the world facing increasing pressure to accelerate the transition to a net zero economy, and Brazil preparing to host COP30 in Belém, the international community is looking to Brazil for leadership and vision. It is therefore a great privilege to introduce today's keynote speaker, a key figure at the heart of these efforts. Ambassador Lilian Chagas is the lead negotiator for COP30 and Director for Climate at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Brazil. She has played a central role in shaping Brazil's climate diplomacy and advancing international cooperation on critical issues such as climate finance, carbon markets, and nature-based solutions. Her leadership is instrumental as Brazil prepares to host one of the most important climate conferences of this decade. At a time when the country's global influence on environmental issues is expanding, she brings deep expertise and a clear strategic vision to the global stage. Please join me in welcoming Ambassador Lilian Chagas.
Bonjour, good afternoon, boa tarde. Thank you very much for inviting me to this Brazil Climate Summit. I understand that last year my then boss, Ambassador André Lago, was a speaker, and then later on he was chosen president designate for COP30. So coming to the Brazil Climate Summit means, you know, you are able to go into higher office. Just it's really nice to be here. Well, I'm gonna give you in less than 20 minutes, hopefully, because I tend to speak too much, an overview of where we are in terms of climate change negotiations and possibilities this year. I will go faster in the first part, where we speak where Brazil stands, and try to be more, a little bit more time in the second part with our ideas for the COP itself in the end of the year. So I will present Brazil as a champion of climate. You can change the... And like the Magna Carta of this new Brazil as far as climate change goes is the current NDC, National Determined Contribution. It's a policy that was brought about by the Paris Agreement in 2015. And all countries must have a climate policy. Every country has to make a contribution to the global effort of keeping the temperature in control. So this is a key year for the NDCs because it's after 10 years of Paris, this is the second cycle of NDCs. So we will have, by the end of the year, a factual assessment of where collectively, in all countries, all the world, where we are in our possibility to keep the temperature under control, or if we are off track and at what level. So this Brazil was among the first countries to present the NDC. It was presented in COP29 by the Vice President Geraldo Alckmin. He went there specifically to show that we are committed to our climate commitments through the international agreements. And also because we wanted to lead by example. Being host of a COP, we have to do everything right. And so we were the first to present the NDC, and an NDC that if you have the time to look at it, it's available on the UNFCCC website. It's it presents the target of the country, but also the policies to how to get there. And in reading these policies, the areas that Brazil will have to advance in order to reduce emissions until 2035 is a window. It's a picture of opportunities to investments, to collaboration, to explore those areas. So the main goal is to present the country and its plan for the next 10 years as agricultural powerhouse with clean energy and new industrial scenario. To develop the industry of Brazil, to become a green source of services and products is one important goal of the country. Also, so the target, it's not an absolute number, it's a range. In 10 years, Brazil is planning to reduce its emissions in all of the economy between 59 and 67%, considering the 2005 levels. And why is that? In terms of real gigatons of CO2, it will mean in 10 years more than cut by half the current emissions. It's a huge task. It's a huge, very ambitious target. And so not only government policies, but also the private sector will have to jump in order to make it possible. And why is that range? It explaining there. Since we are living very challenging times, the world economy, the world geopolitics is not really, very favorable to ambitious climate policy. There's a shortage of finance, of public finance. There is effort to the multilateral development banks to do more what they do now, and also there has been studies and a lot of conversation on how to reform the international financial architecture to make climate finance more available, and more cheap, more easy to access. So in these difficult realities, if we change this reality and regain an environment of international trust and international cooperation with fully functioning international organizations, we will go for the higher target. If not, we have like a cushion to still be contributing to the world reduction of emission, but in a realistic way. So the first part is what is about the policies that have to be in place to achieve this target. So these are just some of them, not them all. You can find a more extensive list in the NBC probably. So the first thing is a pact for ecological transformation among the three branches of the state: the executive, the legislative, and the justice system. They abide for a sustainable development future. Brazil has many challenges to develop, but it will develop taking good care of its natural resource. Also, climate federalism. There is many policies to involve the states and cities. Brazil is such a huge country that some cities or states are bigger than most of countries in the world. So climate federalism, and also the country is following the CHAMP initiative coming from COP28. A mastermind in the world of the current policies is this ecological transformation plan that came from the Minister of Finance, and it's sub-items that will be developing or are being developed as we speak. Sovereign bonds, eco-invest that was developed with the IDB, blended finance, the Amazon Fund, and also Fundo Clima, which are all tools to make this transition possible. Currently, the country is discussing its climate plan. The climate plan is a detail of the NDC. The NDC is an international public policy. You don't have to go into details. You just have to say, this is my target for 2035, and I have, and also it encompasses the whole of the economy and all gases, greenhouse gases, but you don't have to go into details. However, at the climate plan, at the national level, you have to bring the sectors and have important, bold discussions of which sector will do what, in what time, with what policies to support them. So the climate plan is being organized right now. It's not really, it's not ready yet. It has been, it will go into public consultation. All companies and sectors will have opportunity to have their say. The climate plan is worked around a national mitigation strategy and a national adaptation strategy that is led by the Ministry of the Environment, but they only they are the executive secretary for these plans. The governing body, the body that will take decision, is the SIM, the Inter-Ministerial Climate Committee that sits in the Chief of Staff of the Presidency. There is also a big plan that has been evolving for the last years for agriculture that seeks regenerative agriculture. The ABC Plus plan, also a National Energy Transition Plan, the National Biofuels Program. There is a new law that was passed for the fuel of the future. I will get on that later. The plans for the new industrial plan, and the Brazilian emissions trade system. The law has been approved last year. Now the government is finalizing the regulation of this emission trade system. That's going to be the national carbon markets. That's also important to considering the emissions of the target. We can change please. So, what is there already in place? You know, what Brazil has that allows it to be among the first, to be a climate champion, to bring others, to give examples, to best practice to other countries. It's among the most renewable energy mix in the world, 90% renewables in electricity, and almost 50% in the energy mix as a total. The country is in the forefront of the global energy transition, and we must recall here the important calls that came from COP28, from the first global stocktake of the Paris Agreement, and this is a collective evaluation, assessment of where we are, and the conclusion is that the world is off track. You know, the current NDCs are not enough. They are insufficient to meet the goal of the Paris Agreement, that's to keep the temperature under 2 degrees, preferably under 1.5. So, for example, one of these calls in the energy sector was to triple renewables, double energy efficiency, and transition away from fossil fuels in the energy mix. Brazil cannot triple renewables. It has in its electricity mix already almost 100%. But this shows that others can do as well. The biofuels programs is completing 50 years this year. It has been, you know, Brazil has invested in clean fuels for 5 decades, now and this recent law on the fuels of the future, it means that currently the gasoline in Brazil, it has 27% of ethanol from sugarcane. With this law, it can go up to 30%. No country will have this kind of mixture in the gasoline. And also 75% of the cars in the streets, they are flex fuel. The consumer can choose whether they want a gasoline or ethanol according to the price, and increasingly they choose the ethanol because it's cleaner. So this is very important to plan the future of fossils. Also, there is planning for low emission hydrogen and a great potential for sustainable aviation fuels and low emission fuels for shipping. Very recently, the IMO, the International Maritime Organization, agreed and adopted a package of measures to decarbonize the sector. So there's going to be lots of opportunity in the maritime sector. And also, the country is fostering regional integration. You know, Brazil is the biggest, the largest countries in Latin America, and the region has an immense potential to be a source of green services and green products. It has to integrate it more in the energy sector. And also the world's largest tropical forest, and this has become a very powerful instrument as carbon sink. And we're going to be talking a little bit later on how COP30 will foster massive programs of deforestation for reforestation. You can change now. Well, in the international agenda, Brazil is not being shy. That's giving us in the foreign service lots of work. We're a little bit overworked this time. Last year we had the G20 presidency, and we began to construct COP30 at the G20. We had the G20 principles on energy transitions for the first time, president results. We had the TF Clima task force on climate. For the first time in the history of the G20, we merged the two tracks, the political track, the so-called Sherpa track, and the finance track, and we put those officials together to agree on what has to be done, what can be done currently in the international system to facilitate climate finance. The outcomes are really important for unleashing climate finance. And also, for the first time, there is agreements on principles for bioeconomy, which is an area also that is a vast potential for Brazil. This year, we have the BRICS plus presidents. BRICS is Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, and 5 more countries became members, and we are discussing with them finance, trade, common patents, common BRICS patents for climate, and carbon accounting. The discussions are still underway. I'm going back to Brazil because Wednesday we should adopt the 4 outcomes in these fashions. Well, there is what we call the NDC diplomacy. President Lula and the UN Secretary General are talking to all countries in the world, big emitters, around 35 countries who are the currently big emitters. They must move faster. They must come up with ambitious NDCs in order to make our possibilities for achieving the goals of the Paris Agreement a reality. And then, in the end of the year, COP30. COP30 is a big multilateral conference, but not only on the Convention on Climate Change, also it takes care of the Kyoto Protocol and the Paris Agreement, which is now celebrating 10 years. And in 2000, now Brazil is the incoming presidency, although we are still already, trying to influence the outcomes. but the actual presence is next year's. Next slide, please. So COP30 has been, we are like presenting the plans right now, and the main topics I select to give you is it will mean a transition from the negotiation phase to the implementation phase, because 10 years after the adoption of the Paris Agreements, it has been concluded what we call the rule book of the Paris Agreement. You know, regulations, rules, norms that will make the agreement possible. Now we have the full cycle of the agreement. NDCs, we're going to the second round of NDCs, national adaptation plans, they are due this year as well, and BTRs. And we conclude the global stock take in December 2023 with many recommendations to the future. Why we have to go faster? Because what science is telling countries that we have a limited time window to act. Last year was for the first time we had 12 months in a row where we overshoot the 1.5 degrees Celsius. And so what the IPCC and sciences are calling is for speed and scale of solutions. That's are the elements why we are calling COP30, or we are presenting it as a possibility to do a turning point. In Portuguese, Copa da Virada. And it is a very Brazilian concept. It applies to football as well. When you are losing the game, like 7-1 to Germany, when you are losing the game, you manage to change the result. You turned the result. That's a virada. That's something that apply for football as well. And so the main topics will be again finance. We had agreed a new goal on climate finance last year in Baku. It was a very hard discussion. COP29 came this close to collapse, but parties were able to agree a very low, what is considered a low quantum for climate finance, only 300 billion per year. And this will include everything, not only public finance from developed countries, but everything, all the contributions to the multilateral development banks, private sector, everything will be counted as climate finance. So in order to make developing countries accept that what they saw as insufficient quantum, we launched a Baku Belém roadmap to unleash $1.3 trillion in climate finance until 2030. This roadmap is not a negotiation. This will be presented by the two presidencies, Azerbaijan and Brazil, as a roadmap. What has to be done, what can be done in the short term, in the medium term, in the long term, to have this kind of finance. And also a new feature is that outcomes come in 4 dimensions, not only the multilateral negotiations, but the leader summits that are happening in Belém before the COP, 6 and 7 of November. The action agenda, that is also a difference, not what Brazil wants to happen, it's focused on the implementation of the first GST. And I understand we partner with BCG to take a very broad and meaningful action agenda ahead. And also a new thing, a global mobilization, a global mutirão. Mutirão is an indigenous word from Tupi-Guarani. It means when we have a task that is so big and you cannot do it alone, you need your friends, families, and neighbors to perform, like build a house, repair a bridge. And then you need a mutirão. And that's what we need to fight climate change in 2025. We need a collective action of everyone coming together. And also ethical global stocktake that are events that will bring all walks of life, philosophers, artists, students, academics, artists, hopefully to the places of possible tipping points to have an ethical discussion about what the future looks like. And for the action agenda, it's important to say that we will have thematic pavilions, not only national pavilions as usual, but thematic pavilions to discuss with a broad public energy, mobility, nature-based solutions. So we need to internationalize the action agenda, not take people to their national pavilions, but also to discuss the different areas that needs action. So a Brazilian diplomat, Ambassador André Corrêa do Lago, was selected as COP president, which is very good news for us and for the world, because he used to be a climate negotiator. So he knows, how the process works, why it's not working, and what has to be changed. And also, I invite you to read his letters to the international community. The first one was about the vision for COP30. The second was about the global mobilization against climate change, but it's also an effort to bring the science of complex system thinking into the conversation of climate. And the third letter was just released last Friday. It's on the multilateral negotiations that will begin in June in Bonn, Germany, where is the host of the UNFCCC. We want to take some early harvest in this June decision, so the letter is a call on negotiators, is a push on negotiators to deliver already in Bonn and not leave everything for the COP. The Brazilian press thought that the letter was too harsh, poor negotiators, what they have done. And when you go out of the diplomatic language and speak the language of the streets, sometimes you get impact. So I want to finish with a video, because there is going to be places for many areas in the action agenda, but
A Terra está chegando ao ponto de não retorno. Bilhões de toneladas de CO2 estão sendo emitidos na atmosfera. Reduzir essa emissão é essencial. Mas já não é suficiente. É preciso ir além. Mas como? Por meio de uma tecnologia rápida, prática, barata e disponível. Plantar árvores e restaurar florestas. Agora imagina fazer isso nos locais devastados da floresta amazônica. A região que só por existir garante que a Terra permaneça 1 grau Celsius mais fria. O Brasil possui uma vasta área que se estende por toda a borda da Amazônia, fortemente desmatada ao longo de décadas. É nessa região que o governo brasileiro vai reconstruir milhões de hectares de mata nativa e transformar o arco do desmatamento no arco da restauração. Esse projeto já começou. Viabilizado pelo BNDES em parceria com o Ministério do Meio Ambiente e Mudança do Clima, o Arco da Restauração garante reconstruir 6 milhões de hectares de floresta nativa, retirando 1,65 bilhão de toneladas de CO2 até 2030. O Brasil já investiu R$1 bilhão, mas ainda são necessários investimentos de 50 bilhões de reais e a participação de governos, comunidades locais, empresas e cooperações internacionais. Na segunda fase, queremos entregar ao planeta mais 18 milhões de hectares de floresta restaurada até 2050. O Arco da Restauração é um projeto que reconstrói e preserva os ecossistemas e sua biodiversidade, além de criar uma barreira que protege o bioma contra o avanço do desmatamento. Esse processo inclui as comunidades tradicionais, gera empregos verdes e, claro, mais renda. E faz tudo isso capturando carbono e resfriando a terra. Arco da Restauração, a solução que vem da Amazônia, pela Amazônia e para o mundo. Até...
Yeah. Well, yeah, I wanted to show this video that's from the Brazilian National Development Bank, because this is one of the massive programs for restoration. There's going to be other mechanisms, other tools to accelerate reforestation as a tool to removals. So thank you very much for your attention, and thanks again for inviting me here.
Thank you, Ambassador. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Renan Carvalho. I'm an MBA candidate at INSEAD. We'll start today with a panel that looks ahead to COP30. We're going to discuss what's expected, what challenges still lie ahead, and how Brazil can shape the global climate agenda in a meaningful way. With COP30 set to take place in Belém, Brazil has a unique opportunity to lead by example. Brazil's biodiversity, natural resources, and renewable energy position the country to push for continuous, ambitious climate change. In this session, we reflect on Brazil's evolving role in climate diplomacy, take stock of lessons learned from previous COPs, and discuss the key priorities and barriers that must be addressed to deliver impact at COP30. We'll also explore how Brazil can turn past commitments into action, and the role the private sector can play in accelerating investments in scaling solutions. Please come on our stage, our moderator, Jorge Agrave, and a panelist, Nigel Topping, COP26, former UN climate change high-level champion and co-founder of Ambition Loop, and Michel Fredo, senior advisor and partner emeritus at BCG.
Thank you, Renan. Thank you, Michael and Nigel, for being with us today. It's a real pleasure to be here together with Michel. It's almost like an old friend and a Brazilian ambassador. It's the second Brazilian ambassador on stage today. And Nigel is someone I've been following for quite some time now, since Glasgow. So as we heard from Ambassador Lilian Chagas a few minutes ago, there is a lot to do for COP30. So she told us a little bit about how Brazil is preparing. I would like to take this time to hear a little bit from the international community. What do you expect? And with all your learnings, what type of learnings can we apply to the Brazilian presidency so that we can deliver on all the expectations? So to start the conversation in this first round, I'd like to take us back a little bit to COP26, Nigel, where you were leading, Michel was supporting already. So the many initiatives that were created, especially in the action agenda, very successful, like GFANS, among many other. And since then, many of them advanced a lot. They also suffered some backlash. You've seen this, and I'd like to reflect on this. So I'll start with you, Nigel. So you were responsible main responsible for all the success of Glasgow. So what lessons can we learn in the action agenda in two aspects? How to build sectorial, cross-sector initiatives, but then also how to sustain them over time and make them then last.
Yeah, thank you. I think the most important rule in building sectoral initiatives is to not start something new if there's already something good, but find the good thing and then make it better and elevate it. So I'm really encouraged by the thinking that we're seeing from the incoming Brazilian presidency in that sense of building on what's happened over many, many years. I think, and I think you'll hear from Faustine later from Mission Possible. That's a good example of something which was already existing, and we embraced that within the action agenda, and it's very practical and continues now with work that you'll hear about later. I think The second thing that really matters is that initiatives need to have very concrete goals that are meaningful on a CEO's or a minister's timetable. So in COP26, we launched the breakthrough agenda, and that spirit of having very specific deployment goals, you see that across many initiatives now. Not all of them, but if you don't have a specific deployment target for 2030 or 2035, then no one knows where we're going, and we can't measure progress. So I think, and that should be a deployment target in terms that the industry understands, but it should also have a capital deployment target as well, because obviously capital is one of the main things that's needed to drive implementation. So I think those would be the main things. Build on what's already there, have concrete deployment targets, and then keep using the same framework. And one of the things that's really encouraging to hear from Brazil is that really elevating the action agenda to the same level of importance as negotiations. We keep falling into a trap driven by the media and NGOs, and I think the UN itself are focusing obsessively on the negotiations. But as the ambassador says, there's not so much to negotiate now if we put 95% of our energy in the negotiations and don't elevate the action agenda. So I think that elevation of the action agenda under a Brazilian presidency and getting the governance right, I think something we didn't quite manage at COP26 was to make sure that the governance of the action agenda ensures continuity, because that continuity is really important. You can't keep changing targets or changing your focus. So build on what's been there, have specific targets, and maintain continuity with the right kind of governance.
Thanks, Nigel. Michel, you've been supporting the COPs for the last years and supporting businesses for the last decades. Building on what Nigel just said, so what do you think, so over the last year since Glasgow, like what worked well? What could we have done differently to ensure that all the action agenda had this continuity that Nigel is saying?
Yes, I mean, building on okay. I can turn it on. Building on what Nigel was saying, I think, but my first observation is that the action agenda has grown in importance significantly since COP26, in fact, and probably thanks to you, Nigel, where you really helped the UK presidency to boost it at another level. And frankly, what works well, I'll go to what works less well, of course, but what works well is that now you can see that basically on all the major items and components of the action agenda, solutions exist. There are solutions. There are solutions on renewables with the cost going down. There's biofuels, you were mentioning biofuels, regenerative agriculture, you've got all the solutions that exist are already available. And behind those, you have real associations and organizations. You were quoting, Mission Possible, developed into ITA, but there's also IEA. There's a number of organizations, GFANs, that are existing, that really know the topics and what is working and fostering the right environment to push those solutions as far as they can. So we have today most of the solutions in hand. Maybe not all, but most of them. What works well, of course, first point is that in spite of negotiation trying to move forward and the action agenda with the mobilization getting into the play, emissions keep growing. So what works well is we don't get the results that we need to get. That's I would say the first point. And that goes with it. We're not going fast enough on the phasing out of fossil fuels and coal in particular. On the methane pledge, we had that again and again, but it's not generating the results. So the question is really, what do we need to do? The focus on the implementation over declaration, which is clearly the objective of COP30, is really important. As you said, don't reinvent new organization, no structure. One of the elements, one COP after the other, is that the host country has always a tendency to reinvent the wheel and to add to their agenda, their own agenda. The agenda is already there. And therefore, as the solutions exist, you need to promote what is existing to get results. So binding agreement is an important, with timelines, as you said, it was the case for the breakthrough, but even more, making sure that they are binding. The dimension of equity and justice, again, that is promoted heavily by the Brazilian presidency, is a core component. There needs to be, vulnerable countries, but also vulnerable people needs to be on board, otherwise it's not going to happen. The other point that you see, because the agenda has been growing, we've added health, we've added nature, rightly so. It's one transformation. It's not going to be climate on one side and then you do the rest, at least from the corporation, but also for the country standpoint. But for the corporations, you do the transformation once. So you need to identify the materiality domain on climate, of course, but also on water, on pollution, on air, whatever it is, and make the transformation accordingly. So that's another one. And the last one is, as you said, it's continuity. But I think, again, the COP presidency has clearly said that its COP30 is, as you said, a veranda. But the veranda needs to continue, and there's COP31 and COP32, because once you put in place all this accountability and you accelerate those solutions that already exist to get full deployment and the CO2 really reducing, you need to monitor that and make sure that it happens and that all conditions in terms of policy, technology, whatever it is, are in place and can generate the results.
Thanks, Michel. So continue coming from the more strategic to more tactical advice here. So I know you were both advising governments and Dan Yoshpi, the Brazilian high-level champion. So and Nigel, coming back to you, when you want to reach progress and agreements among parties, among companies, among sectors, process matters, right? The way you engage with them matters a lot in order to build success. What are the 2-3 things that you are telling Dan Yoshpi, but also Ambassador Lilian and Ambassador André about how to build that process in a very tactical way so that we yield success at the end?
Well, some of them the ambassadors already explained. For example, saying we're going to have thematic pavilions. That's a process evolution. I don't think a presidency has owned that. It's happened a little bit by evolution, but saying because we need to organize ourselves around solution tracks, not around organizations. So we don't have 17 organizations working on nature. We have a nature pavilion. We have an energy pavilion. So I think that's a really good innovation. I think one thing which presidencies often underestimate is how many people in the world want to help. So I think if you look at the action agenda, which is more than the global stocktake, actually. It's sort of, there's decisions which the party-driven process has created, the creation of the champion, the action agenda plan, which Gonzalo, the Chilean champion, and myself were mandated to deliver to COP26. And some of the decisions that have come that are related to the global stocktake before then, the Sharm el-Sheikh adaptation agenda, which was embraced by the parties in COP27. So those lay out kind of an architecture for action. I think presidencies could go beyond, there's this, all the envoys have been appointed, but those are kind of geographic envoys internationally. I think a presidency could, for example, say, we know we need 70 green steel plants, I think Faustine will correct me if I'm wrong, by 2030, and we've only got, say, 4 that have reached final investment decision. I want to ask 2 industry ministers and 2 CEOs to bring to the COP 10 final investment decisions. So I think the presidencies could tap into the collective will to support them more than is normally done, and there's still time for that. And I do think that this laying out the 3 letters, if anyone hasn't read the 3 letters so far, these are very thoughtful letters talking about an evolution of the process. This is not a bomb going off and change the process. It's building on what's already been there, because we know that a party-driven process is very respectful of process. And we need to kind of open up and embrace some of the innovations which are a bit different from the consensus driving every single comma. For example, just a simple example is that this commitment to trebling renewables, that's not a consensus decision which every country has agreed to, but it's a much broader club of the willing, with many countries and many in the private sector agreeing to it. And I think if we're going to go as fast as we need, then the action agenda can't be constrained by consensus thinking, because consensus thinking always goes at the pace of the slowest. So we have to embrace the fact that the process has embraced coalitions of the willing, and make that the center of the action agenda. And the last thing, and I was really pleased to see this in the third letter, which I've just read, is that we do need to tidy up the negotiating agenda, because every incoming presidency is presented with a list of 120 agenda items. It's overwhelming, and that alone distracts most presidencies from focusing on the action agenda. So I think tidying up the process is necessary. But remember, we're building on a lot of innovation that's the party-driven process has already driven, and in particular this ability to have parties and non-parties coming together in these coalitions of the willing around these exponential goals.
Thanks, very interesting. Michel, you circulate among business leaders for a long time, right? So if you could select, what are the 2-3 things that would make most global business leaders happy, to hear from these letters, from the ambassadors, from Dan? What are the tipping point actions that the presidency and Dan can take to engage everyone in bolder action?
So I would start by saying everyone understands that the geopolitical context is very difficult and it's very complex, and it adds a lot to uncertainty. And from the corporation standpoint, what is necessary is more certainty and more accountability so that you can drive investments. And that's in a number of situations blocked. I think the NDCs are an opportunity to clarify by country what they want to do, what policies they're going to put. The finance agenda is going to be important, but it means that what in fact people are expecting is climate leadership. And what I hope is that it's not going to be climate leadership the way the French understand it, quite top down. This is what you need to do. But adding to the skills that the diplomatic arm of Brazil has shown the world, adding this diplomatic approach so that we can really get the NDCs where it needs, so that the ambition goes from 2.7 to hopefully below 2 degrees. The finance commitments, the 1.3 trillion, which is a triggering effect to also channel those investments, and also more generally leverage the trade and industry for decarbonization, so that the transition finance is there, etc., are very important components. So I would say having the ability of the COP30 presidency to initiate a leadership and a governance that goes with it, that integrates better, so that there is a better discussions and collaboration, so that we can drive and reduce uncertainty to get those projects financed and advanced and cooperation move forward, I think is a very critical element.
Thanks. Nigel, I saw you writing down something you want to add on Michel's point?
Yes, just 1.3 trillion is not the goal. It's 3.2 trillion. This is a really important point, because quite often our whole conversation gets trapped in some of the narrow framing of the UNFCCC in 1992, where South Korea is a developing country, right? It's kind of a joke, right? But that's the way we're trapped, and sometimes we talk about it. So the reason I say it's not 1.3, it's 3.2 is one of the breakthroughs we made in COP27 was Mahmoud Mohidin, the Egyptian champion, and I commissioned the first Stern-Songwe Bhattacharya paper. We said, we're fed up with this conversation about 100 billion. We know it's a promise that's been made and it hasn't been met, so it's really important. It's a measure of trust, and the non-delivery erodes trust. But even if we had delivered 100 billion, we wouldn't have solved climate finance, because that's a very small part of it. So please, can we take an engineering approach and work backwards? What do we need to do? How much will it cost? So we gave that task to Nick Stern, Vera Songwe, and Amma Bhattacharya. They came back and said, it's 2.4 trillion a year for emerging markets, excluding China, by 2030, of which 1.4 is domestic resource mobilization and 1 is international. the numbers were updated for COP29, so it's 3.2 trillion, 1.9 domestic, 1.3 international. This is so important because if you want to attract international capital from outside the country and you haven't mobilized domestic resources, good luck. The CEO of the asset manager of the bank comes to the country and says, oh, show me some of the local financiers who are supporting this transition. And if the answer is, oh, we were hoping you would do that, then they're straight back on the plane. The people who understand the local context best are local finance providers. So I think we've lost something in this focus on 1.3. It's actually 3.2, of which 1.3 is from developed to developing. But it relies on the 1.9 of domestic resource mobilization. And here, with its sophisticated capital markets and with BNDES as a really helpful catalyst, Brazil's got a really good story to tell about mobilizing domestic finance as part of attracting capital from overseas. So that's what I was writing down, so I didn't forget, so thank you.
I think this is a very good segue to the next round, which is about how Brazil can seize this opportunity, right? So, of course, this is a global event, but Brazilians have a very high hope that Brazil can, finalize COP30 in a better position that it entered, especially from a global perspective. That we can reposition Brazil not only as part of a problem, that of course we are a big part of the problem, but also as a solutions hub for the world, and to attract partners and investors. So building on what you just said, do you think that ambition is realistic, that Brazil can also seize that opportunity to show this other side and the other side of the country and attract investment, attract partners, or is it just a dream? And what Brazilians have to do to transform that into a real opportunity?
Well, I think it's already happening. I mean, many of you will be attending or aware of the Brazil Climate Investment Week, which is in Sao Paulo in June 5th to 7th. And with ambition, we're working with many of the partners there to build and demonstrate that there is a really rich pipeline of investable opportunities which are being invested in at a growing rate in Brazil. And if we can't tackle investing in nature-based solutions in Brazil, we have no chance in the rest of the world. But I think the signs are very positive that that's growing, the pipeline's strong, of real investable opportunities, and it's growing internationally. So there I think Brazil can benefit, but also lead and provide a model for other countries around the world to attract capital. I also think it's really, really important, and the ambassador mentioned this, that the world doesn't just think about Brazil as nature-based solutions. It's also got some very interesting energy resources, and then things like green hydrogen and green ammonia, and the kind of import substitution, which many countries around the world would really love to get off the drug of hydrocarbons so that they can manufacture their own fertilizers for their own food industry. So I think there's a lot of interesting things happening industrially and in finance in Brazil, and a spotlight on Brazil can both encourage innovation but also show a model for the rest of the world. So I think the evidence is already there that things are moving in a very strong direction, and more people becoming aware of that by visiting Brazil in the run-up to and at the COP will be helpful.
Thanks. Just a quick marketing here. So in these sessions we won't have questions, but on the restoration session, on the breakouts later on, there are going to be more of conversation. So I would like to open the floor for everyone and then discuss, get deeper. So Ambassador Lilian mentioned nature-based solutions. You mentioned as well. There's a big opportunity, not the only one, but we're going to have the time to have questions and have a conversation about what each of us can do about it. Michelle, as I mentioned, you've been an informal ambassador of Brazil. And what are your hints, your tips to business leaders in Brazil so that they can seize these opportunities? So when you sit down with CEOs, when you go to Brazil, what are the 2-3 things you say? So I think one of Nigel mentioned, do first and then ask for help later. But what are the things you tell them so that they really seize the opportunity of COP30?
So thank you for presenting me as an ambassador, but I don't think I deserve that yet. Working on it. So I'm going to answer with some humility. You forgive me for that. First, I mean, and you all know it, Brazil is a fantastic host for this COP in particular, and for related to climate, because not only Brazil is exposed to the whole range of the climate issues, but also Brazil, as you were describing, has solutions for most whether it's biofuels, whether it's energy in general, whether it's low emissions transport, whether it's agriculture, and you name it, and forest, of course, etc. So Brazil is really the right place to be, and as we are going to have a solution type of COP, I think that, of course, the Brazilian corporations that are actors in developing those solutions need to be there, showcase, show what they're doing, and attract investment. So that's for me obvious. But okay, the first tip is please attend the COP in Belém. It's not just for the Brazilians, for the others as well. I think that there is necessity to do a lot of advertising and ensuring that the right people at the right level attend, and for the Brazilian at least, I would say, and attend at senior level. People who are making actual decisions, I think is very important, because you need to be a role model so that, others internationally can come. Then, as corporations, I think that everything that corporation can do to force, to clarify what changes are needed to accelerate investment are welcome, whether it's on policies, whether it's on finance, or on capabilities, or on technology. I think it's important that their voice is being heard, but what we're doing and the conditions to do more and to accelerate, I think is an important one, and therefore both the showcasing of what they're doing today and the potential it has in Brazil and outside of Brazil is an important component, and that's what I think they should be doing, both on what actually they're doing and what they need to do more.
Thanks,
I just want a nuance to build on that. I think there are two types of private sector voice when it comes to saying what needs to happen to enable more investment, more innovation. One is the one that I know Michelle is talking about, which comes from the experience of being a leader and leaning in and making things work and having some of the scars from how difficult it is to be an innovator. The other one is a defensive position, which comes from cowardice and followership, which says, we'll move when everybody else fixes the problems. Right? If that's your stance, don't show up. You're boring. You've already probably lost the race of innovation, and we don't need your advice, because it's just not credible. But if you're moving, and if you're winning and discovering what the real problems are through your commitment to action, then you have real credibility. Then you're part of the mutirao, which I think we're being called to.
This raises another point that you're making, that I think at the COP30 it is important to really nail what the cost of inaction is. It's true for Brazil, it's true for the whole world. I think insisting on the cost of inaction is a critical component, so that people understand that in fact there's no choice, and you need to act, and you need to act fast. And by the way, there are opportunities to be seized, as I said. But this cost of inaction is important. And related to that, I think it's also important that corporations start showing that they're very serious about their adaptation agenda and the consequences of climate in terms of the resilience of the supply chains and what they're doing. But again, it's also an opportunity for some of them for investments that they can help doing in cities or wherever they are in terms of their operations, but also what they're doing in their own factories and locations, because that's, again, an important message that needs to be deployed, and it's not sufficiently today discussed, where I have the impression that when you talk about adaptation to cooperation, it only starts to be part of the agenda.
Thank you. So we have to close in 3 minutes, but I have to add a last question for you both. I'd like you to close your eyes and think about, the flight back from Belém to your home countries after the COP. If you imagine yourself in that flight coming home, what have happened in the COP that will make you really proud, to say that you'll never forget that you were in this COP, that you helped some process yield some success? What are the On the NDCs revision, which is important, and on the action track, what are the 1-2 things that will make you really proud of the results of COP30?
Okay, well, I'll have two. Well, as part of the UK's Climate Change Committee, which is the body which advises the government on the NDC, I hope that both Brazil's and the UK's leading and ambitious and early NDCs have been seen as a model which have inspired many others, because they're both extraordinary, coming from very different backgrounds, very different economies, but both very ambitious. And I hope that every day there's been a celebration of progress from multiple stakeholders, depending on the topic, that has been elevated by the presidency and covered in the press, and that has had at least as much coverage as elements of the negotiations, so that it's a much more vibrant story, fitting with the energy and the vibrancy of Brazil about how the way we are coming together to solve problems, and that many of those people who were only thinking about what other people need to do to solve the problem for them are now realizing that they need to get on the train as well.
Thank you, Nigel. Michel?
I was going to say I take a plane to Australia. That Brazil has convinced that there's the virage that you were discussing is taken, and that the succeeding COPs are going to follow the example and continue the work on the solutions development and making sure that there has been, of course, at COP30, very clear examples and highlights, but on all the initiatives that the momentum continues and people want to do a similar type of action agenda in COP31, COP32, and COP33.
Actually, we should point out that that partnership between the Latin American group and I can't remember what it's called, the group that includes the UK and France and Australia and Turkey, we don't know yet, have always collaborated well. We had the Lima Paris Action Agenda, which is really the birth of Paris. We had Chile and the UK on the breakthroughs and the new plan. And then I think there's a really great opportunity for Brazil to work with Australia or Turkey to continue that pattern of taking the governance of the action agenda to the next level.
No, he asked me to dream, so I dream to go to Australia. Sorry
okay, yeah.
for that.
But that shows you're not yet an ambassador, because you're picking sides and you're not allowed to.
I'm French.
So let's hope Michel has an amazing journey direct to Australia, and I'd like to give a round of applause for both of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the great panel. My name is Victoria Raimundo. I am an MBA student at INSEAD, and I would like to welcome to the second session, Why Brazil? Connecting Brazilian and EU supply chains. Brazil stands out not only as a vital provider of low-carbon goods and services, but also as a key partner for Europe in securing sustainable, resilient, and decarbonized value chains. From renewable energy and industrial manufacturing to sustainable agriculture and biodiversity preservation, Brazil holds a unique position to bridge its natural resource wealth with global climate ambition. To open our conversation, I'm pleased to call to the stage Ricardo Pierozzi, Managing Director and Partner at BCG, to share the Brazil Climate Report. All of you will receive this document after the event. And I would like to welcome Ricardo to the floor.
Good afternoon. Perfect. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Go back to the first one here. If this is working. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Pleased to be here representing BCG. As content partner, every year we present a report trying to bring thought leadership and ideas on how Brazil can be a global hub for decarbonization. In this year, we're going to talk about industrial products. This is a short summary of the report. As mentioned, after the presentation, the full report is going to be available on the Brazil Climate Summit website. So first of all, I wanted to thank the team that made this possible. On the left part, our BCGers, and also the sponsors, the board of the Brazil Climate Summit. And I'm going to start with a brief recap, right? This is the image that we have as Brazil being a global hub for green solutions. That's our starting point. We really believe that Brazil is not just a beautiful natural place, but also that it has the resources and the capabilities to be a hub for green solutions. From land to do agriculture at scale, sustainable production of biofuels, the power and renewables that can be produced at scale in Brazil, the massive forest areas to be preserved and also restored. We do believe Brazil is a very, very unique and special place in the decarbonization agenda. All considered, we believe there is a $2 to $3 trillion of opportunities in Brazil to invest in green solutions. Every year, as I mentioned, in the Brazil Climate Summit, we deep dive in a topic of choice to show and highlight those opportunities. In 24, we talked about biofuels. Also in 24, we deep dive in agriculture and sustainable agriculture. In 23, we discussed green hydrogen. So all these reports are available in the Brazil Climate Summit website. If you have not had the chance to download, there's the QR code here, but also just log into the website. Today, what I'm going to be talking about is green industrial products, right? And I'm going to focus here on steel and aluminum. Aluminum for those in the US, aluminum for those in Europe. Why those two main industries? They represent about 25% of emissions from the industrial sector. So those are the key industries combined, especially steel, but also aluminum as a very power-intensive industry. And I'm going to, here at the bottom, we have a couple of numbers that I'm going to make the case that Brazil can increase exports to the EU by 20 times. That's a very bold and aggressive scenario that I'm going to discuss. That could help European companies to reduce its Scope 3 emissions by up to a quarter in these products, and that can represent up to 15 billion euros in investments in Brazil. So that's our agenda for this study. I'm starting here with a view of the value chain of these two products. On the left, it's steel, on the right, aluminum. It's a lot of information, but what we see here from the beginning of the value chain, from the basic materials, iron ore, and on the other side, the bauxite, we see that Brazil is very well positioned in terms of reserves and in terms of mining. But we fall quite a lot when we look at producing crude steel and primary aluminum. So when we look at this, there is a very obvious thing of why don't we export steel and aluminum instead of exporting just the raw material, right? And on top of that, and that's the last bar on each of these value chains, is the carbon intensity of each country. And you can see that Brazil is super well positioned as of today already to displace some of the more heavy emissions intensive countries that are on the top, right? So it's not just logical to not ship just the raw materials, but the processed metals, but also it would be very beneficial to emissions. And what we did is we ran a very simplified exercise from this chart, which is, what if we were to have our share of processing that we have on the raw materials, right? So when we look at steel, if we reached our third position there with 17% of the share of processing, that would leave, as of today, without doing anything new, a 3 to 4% reduction in these value chain emissions, right, globally. And that's about 100 million tons of CO2 equivalent. When we look to the right in aluminum, this would be a 10 to 13% reduction in emissions in this value chain. And that's because aluminum is very power hungry and our power is fully renewable. So that's a huge contribution. All combined, a 4 to 5% reduction in emissions if Brazil were to climb that ladder in producing these metals. Next, from this, we went a little bit deeper into looking at Europe. This is the example of steel. In this chart, what we show on the vertical axis is the level of emissions of producing steel in each of the countries. And on the horizontal axis, we see the volume in terms of value that is exported to the EU from these countries. We see Brazil is very well positioned in terms of emissions, but very little in terms of volume, right? So if we apply that same logic of Brazil, displacing some of the more offender countries, right, exporting more finished steel than just the iron ore, it could reduce just in Europe 13% of this value chain emissions, and that's 13 million tons a year. That goes directly to Scope 3 emissions of European companies, right, that you can just reduce by importing from Brazil instead of importing from another country that actually imported the raw material for Brazil. So you just make it a shorter trip if you promote a Brazilian steel. The same logic applies to aluminum. But there is a more, because Brazil has the potential to reduce even further its steel production footprint, right, and carbon intensity. If we lower to the full potential of Brazil, which is about a third of its currently level, by applying technologies, using more biomass in the furnace and things like this, we could, just Brazil, displace 30 to 40% of Scope 3 emissions of European companies, right? Which could be very, very attractive. Of course, that's not an easy task. I'm bringing the provocation, right? There is plenty of challenges to achieve that. And that's what we talked a bit in this slide. We see four main pillars that we need to address to be able to capture that opportunity. The first one is continue to invest, the private sector, the companies, to reduce the emissions of their process, right? The companies need to continue that. The second is financing, making finance available for green products and green investments. The third is to put a price on carbon and reward lower carbon products. And the fourth is to make sure that we coordinate the demand so that this cycle works. All combined, we believe this could unlock that potential and, of course, increase the scale and with that also cost competitiveness of the country. I'll go quickly into those four pillars with a bit more information. So on the first one, the industry, right? The industry itself needs to work. On the left, we talk a bit about using technologies that reduce the footprint. There are plenty of technologies available. We need to invest on those and promote them and make them more available in the two industries that we are discussing. Also, we need to increase circularity, right? Use more, reuse more the products, collect and reuse the products to reduce its footprint. And third, we need to continue to seek the competitiveness of these industries, right? We need efficient and competitive prices for the products. On the second pillar, we talked about finance, right? Making capital available at a lower cost and higher availability for green investments. Here is the example of two government-backed programs that showcase investment opportunities, the Brazil Investment Platform and the Eco Invest Brazil, that has projects and initiatives, and it connects the finance world with the production initiatives. The third pillar was to price carbon, right, and reward lower carbon. Here what we did is an example with aluminum. On the left, we see what's the scope 1 emissions of aluminum produced in Brazil versus the leader, China. And Brazil is a bit more competitive when we look at scope 1, right? About 20% more competitive than China. When we look at the CBAM impact, and CBAM is a very, very good mechanism to deal with pricing carbon and kind of putting a playing level field for countries. When we look at this difference and we put on top of the base price of Brazil and China, it doesn't change much. China is still much more competitive than Brazil. But what happened when we look at scope 2 emissions? On the left, look what happens when you put scope 2, and then Brazil becomes a third of the emissions of China. And if that was to be priced in the CBAM, which is not yet, Brazil would be much more competitive in terms of cost. So that's just to show CBAM is a great initiative, but it's not enough. It needs to go further. You need to look at scope 2 and even scope 3 if you want to really consider the broad impact of emissions, and that can turn the competitiveness game around, as we can see in this example. And the fourth, as I mentioned, is the demand, coordinate demand, sync demand. Here is a list of examples. There are plenty of other ones, but great examples from companies that are actually investing in creating a demand for green products. Those are very good examples, but we need much, much more. Otherwise, the industry is not going to evolve and have the products that really bring the green attribute forward. So, as I close this, I want to go back to those initial numbers that I mentioned in the beginning. If we were to capture the opportunities that we mentioned, we would be increasing exports from Brazil to the EU by 20 to 22 times, just in these two products, aluminum and steel. Almost a quarter of emissions could be reduced in scope 3 of European companies when we do this, just in Europe, okay? And that would be an opportunity of 10 to 15 billion euros just with the production. There is also the whole value chain that would develop and create indirect impacts in the economy, okay? So that's about it for the study. As I mentioned, the full study with more details is available on the website. I thank you. I hope this brings another ideas and topics for the panel that starts now. Thank you.
Thank you, Ricardo, for the thoughtful highlights. In the next session, we'll explore how Brazil can deepen in its integration to European climate strategies through innovation, investment, and collaboration. Please join us, Claudia Martinez Ochoa, Head of Private Equity for Asia and Latin America at Proparco, Faustine de la Salle, CEO of Mission Possible Partnership, Daniel Godinho, Sustainability and Investor Relations Director at WEG, and to moderate, Arthur Ramos, Managing Director and Partner at BCG.
Bonjour, boa tarde. It's a pleasure being here, and it's a pleasure being after this so many good sessions. Thanks a lot, Ricardo, for being here, and always on our role of content partner here. We try to be provocative. It's really delicious for us, consultants, that we get the problem and we go working and discussing with our teams, with the teams of Brazil Climate Summit, some ideas, and we bring these provocative ideas here to you, okay? So a pleasure. And again, we have from Ambassador Ligan here before, from Rai, from the previous panel that we have. We're talking about sports, we talk about competition. So the bar is very high here for our discussion here, and I'm sure that we're going to be bringing interesting aspect on our discussion. Okay. So on behalf of the Brazilian climate team, I'd like really to thank everyone. We're going to be doing this discussion and also individual questions, but I think it's very good to do this interactive, okay, if we can bring different points and the panel contributes. We have, of course, pre-scheduled some of the conversation, but I think the debate is much more important, okay. So, we're starting on the hard to abate sectors and the name of the panel, Why Brazil? No? So it's very, very important. I think there are several analyses, there are several PowerPoints, several Excel spreadsheets. That's all the potential that we have. No? But the overriding question on this panel, how to get this materialized, how to get this happening, how to get it going. So I start here with Claudia, and from our experience as investor focus and based in Latin America and Asia. What do you see the most promising investment opportunities that we have in the direction of this Brazil green economy, and how that connects also Europe, because it's a little bit we are here and we're subjacent also to those discussions. Okay, so starting with Claudia, thanks a lot. Okay.
So I head the private equity department at Proparco, which is the French development bank owned by the Agence Française de Développement, and we invest only in private sector and emerging markets. So I head Asia and Latam, so I have a view on both Brazil and Asia. I think Brazil, without a doubt, is at least in our continent, because I'm originally Colombian, a mastodont in terms of the size of its market and the climate opportunities, as we just saw in all the previous panels and studies. But there's still challenges that it needs to face. And again, we saw that in the study that was just presented, particularly with Asia. In my view, Brazil needs to find the right spot in the market where it can create high-value products. So precisely as we saw a little while ago, moving up the value chain. Why? Because its cost of labor is never going to be as competitive as Asia's, so there's no point in competing there. But it does have that green premium that Asia does not have. So when we were looking at the previous slides, Brazil, 85% of Brazil's energy mix is renewable between hydro, solar, and wind, while India's, which in the steel and aluminium slide that we saw was the second competitor, the first in exports of steel and aluminium, only 20% of its energy mix is renewable, which is why when we were looking at the premiums, it's very, very dirty Scope 2, Scope 3, but it has leveraged its internal market and positioned itself from a national policy standpoint as a China plus one strategy, which Brazil has not done. So Brazil is still focused on commodity exports and hasn't made that shift yet in deciding as a national policy that they need to leverage its manufacturing base. Again, the strongest, best in the entire Latin American continent, with the best research facilities, engineers, etc. With, yes, a large market, but it's puny and tiny compared to 1.5 billion Indians or 1.5 billion Chinese. So Brazil needs to look outside of Brazil and start investing across Latin America to generate economies of scale and stop thinking about its own market and think ambitiously and say, how can my Brazilian company not just reach scale in Brazil, but reach scale in Latin America and then be able to be competitive with international actors? Otherwise, you're playing a game that's too small, and I hear that too often in Brazil, that I'm in Sao Paulo, so my dream is to go to expand nationally to Minas Gerais, and maybe if I'm courageous, to Nordeste. And I'm like, oh wow, you really need to think much more thoughtfully, and that requires, I think, not just private sector investors, both local, as we mentioned, and actors like us, but also I think probably a little bit more thoughtful support from policy.
Thanks a lot, Claudia. And I think it's a very good call, okay, for the Brazilian, and speaking as a Brazilian, okay, for how do we think about globally, but also not to forget about Latin America. I think this is a very, very important thing. Thanks for bringing that up. So next question, I'd like to hear Faustine. I think she's almost a Brazilian citizen now. I saw her making speeches, making the presentations in Portuguese, and perfect Portuguese. So great on that. And Faustine, on the Mission Possible partnership, and particularly on the ITA discussion. Okay, I would like you to explore a little bit. Why was that the priority? I don't know if it's the first one that you're doing, but it's such an important one that you're bringing that to Brazil, and also on all the panel reacting here. We'd like to listen to your comments on the perspective you see for the decarbonization of hard-to-abate sectors, but also the potential for moving forward.
Yeah, so at the Mission Possible Partnership and the Industrial Transition Accelerator, which is the UN-backed initiative that we host, we're focusing on unlocking first-of-a-kind projects in those hard-to-abate sectors, and looking at the opportunity across emerging markets, because we have the assumption that there is going to be a profound shift in the localization of industry going forward. Just as coal-based activities a century or 2 centuries back co-located with coal mines, our assumption is that energy-intensive industries are going in the future to become clean and therefore need to locate where there is abundant, cheap, renewable energy. And that's not necessarily Europe, it may be the US, but a lot of that potential sits in emerging economies like Brazil. So when we launched the ITA back at COP28, we looked at which countries we could go into that had the convergence of favorable conditions to see first-of-a-kind projects emerge. And Brazil topped the list. For the reasons that have already been mentioned today, it topped the list because of its natural resources, its renewable energy potential, the diversity of its renewable energy potential as well, because it's not just solar, it's solar plus wind plus hydro. It topped the list because of its resources in terms of bauxite and in terms of iron ore that we already spoke about. Also because of its political will and the engagement from the government to mobilize around this agenda. And we've had a partnership with MEDIC, so the Ministry of Development, Industry and Trade, for the past 2 years. That has been very important for us progressing in Brazil. And what has also caught our attention in Brazil is the fact that there's an industrial base to start working with, an industrial base that is already relatively low carbon with the rest of the world, and both domestic and export opportunities. And I think it's important, to your point earlier, to think big in terms of exports to Europe, but not only to Europe, to mobilize the rest of Latin America as well, but also to look to the domestic market, because there are specific spots of opportunities in the domestic market from our perspective, especially where Brazil is importing a hell of a lot. So that's nitrogen fertilizers, that's methanol, where almost everything that's consumed in Brazil is imported at high cost, and where there's an opportunity to produce locally and to produce green, to also unlock investment in projects that will mature the technologies, that will mature the infrastructure required to then go after the value-adding opportunities in steel and aluminium that we've been speaking about already.
Thanks a lot, Faustine. Thanks for the comments here. And then moving to Daniel Godinho here and WEG as a very important player, global, a very interesting case of success of Brazil on high value-added products, industrial products, but I'd like you to explore a little bit the innovation, the importance of innovation on taking the advantage of Brazil and also playing in fields that are not typically the ones that Brazil play in the commodity range. Okay.
All right, good afternoon. So I speak on behalf of WEG. WEG is a Brazilian global company that manufactures electric and electronic equipment that goes all along the energy chain, from the very generation of energy until the final consumption, going through distribution, transmission, automation, everything. If you think of energy, we're there with our products and solutions. And of course, if we work in this field, we have to think always about innovation together with sustainability, right? For us, both are in the very core of our business strategy. They need to walk together. And how do we make them walk together? First, some numbers I think it's important to be shared. In terms of innovation, 55% of our revenue comes from products released in the market in the last 5 years. So this is concrete outcome of innovation. Of course, it takes a lot of investment in R&D and innovation to get to these numbers, but if you don't have a commitment and processes in order to make sure that the invested money goes and delivers results, you don't get there, right? So these are concrete numbers. And we add sustainability to that because 73% of our revenue, of our net revenue, also comes from sustainable products according to FTSE. And the way we must combine these things, we align our offer of products in 4 different pillars, so to say: energy efficiency, operational efficiency meaning digitalization, automation, and electrification of processes, renewable energies, and electrical mobility. And by doing so, we guarantee that these are applied in our customers in order to make them more sustainable, make them greener. So we use our innovation to deliver sustainable results to our clients, and that's why we believe and we make sure those 2 things always work together.
Okay, thanks a lot, Rudinho, here for the perspective. So moving back also to the investor perspective, Claudia, I think you mentioned a little bit the scale challenge and the broader perspective on that. What do you see as key barriers? What are the difficulties of when you perceive particularly on the Brazilian investment side, and how they could be overcome?
I think I'll give a little bit of the barriers, but also of positive things. Maybe I'll start with the positive. So, for example, Brazil has one of the strongest regulatory frameworks in renewables, in wind and solar. So it really is easy to invest because it's a well-regulated environment, and it shows. That's why the sector keeps growing. So it's a really good thing. The other thing recently, in the last couple of years, was a regulatory change. It's very specific that allows us as investors to invest directly in Brazilian companies with the figure of the FIPE, which is the investment vehicle used in Brazil. It's limited, similar to a limited partnership outside of Brazil. Before that, it was impossible for a foreign investor to invest directly into a company in Brazil because of lack of corporate liability protections. So I think that's a super positive change that has, at least in our case, opened up the possibility to be more active in direct investments. In terms of downside, I think one of the things that is most difficult, I think, also to find a solution is foreign exchange volatility. I think Brazil has one of the most volatile currencies, at least in the markets that I oversee, of all of Asia and all of Latam. Colombia is second behind, and it's very similar because both are tied to commodity prices. So every time oil goes up and down, the Brazilian real collapses or increases. While Asia is incredibly stable, I have devaluations of maybe 5% per year, where Brazil can see swings of 40% in one single year. That deters foreign investors that invest like me in euros or dollars, because what do we do when we need to get out of an investment in a bad year when the real has lost 40%? So the question is very difficult. We try to manage it. One of the things I would say is there's not enough, at least I haven't seen solutions being offered by, for example, BNDES to try to provide, for example, first loss specific for FX for foreign investors, for example, investing in Brazilian private equity funds, which we're investors in many of Brazilian private equity funds. They invest at par with us as investors, and I do wonder if there's a role for someone to come up. I mean, we obviously, unfortunately, we are like in that same difficulty that we cannot offer a first loss, but there's clearly a missing gap for that FX volatility, so it's quite difficult to manage as an investor. So I think that's one of the most, for me, the most difficult barrier. The investment barriers that Brazil historically had have been reduced dramatically. It's still a little bit more difficult to do business in Brazil than it is, I don't know, in a neighboring country like Colombia, but 1,000 times easier than India. So I would say it's been a long way, and we can now invest relatively easily, and particularly there's no added difficulty whether it's infra, green, or normal. So that's a good thing. But unfortunately for FX, I think collectively we need to think of A, how to do a short-term solution, but B, the real-term solution would be to start diversifying the economy seriously away from commodities and into higher added value products, as we've been discussing. Again, also because Brazil has a green premium that other economies don't necessarily have, and it's been too easy historically to focus on commodities. It's like the lower hanging fruit, and obviously there's more effort and more difficulty in moving up the value chain, but I think it's a necessity to A, boost GDP growth, create more skilled jobs. I mean, there's a million trickle-down effect that would generate, and part of that would definitely help with FX, because that's why Asia has a flat FX, because they're exporters, basically.
Great. Oh, thanks again. And then, Faustine, I think taking a little bit on the way we ended at the last, you mentioned there's a lot of deficit on our export, on our import side, import profile on some of these commodities, but anyway, even tackling that in parallel or directly, but how do you see the potential for Brazil also contributing not only for internal but also supplying with those low carbon products and particularly for the EU? Okay.
So I want to build on what has just been said, which is that FX is a big issue for investment in the country. The cost of capital, therefore, is also a big issue. And that's what we see in investment in, for instance, brownfield, clean industrial projects in Brazil, in the cement sector, in the aluminium sector where we're working, where there's tremendous projects that we have on our map that we're working with that are only blocked by the cost of capital. And so that's extremely frustrating, because we could have aluminium production that is even greener than it already is and could really capture lead markets for very, very green aluminium out there that are unable to do so because of cost of capital. So that's the layer around investment. Then if I go towards the broader portfolio of projects we're seeing in Brazil, both focused on the domestic market and focused on the export market, especially exports to Europe. And we're working with about 15 projects right now, 11 officially announced, a few more that are going to be announced in the next few days. Out of 20 projects or so that we've identified, so commercial scale, clean industrial projects in sectors like cement, steel, aluminium, sustainable aviation fuels. Where we see the biggest potential right now, and that translates into numbers of projects, is hydrogen-based projects. So hydrogen transformed into ammonia for exports towards Europe, hydrogen transformed into ammonia for fertilizer production locally, hydrogen transformed into e-methanol for both domestic and local export, and obviously then hydrogen used to reduce iron locally rather than ship iron ore across the globe. The challenges we see for those projects are really, and there are several, but two really come out on top. One is certainty of demand markets, because a lot of those projects, as I said, eye towards Europe as an export market, but are still not fully sure of how they will navigate CBAM, and are still not fully sure of how European policy around lead markets for clean commodities like clean steel or sustainable aviation fuels will evolve in the next 12 months, and how open or closed the doors will be to imports from the rest of the world, including Brazil. So that's one area that I think requires much more collaboration and cooperation between European players and Brazilian players to really understand to what extent Europe will open its doors, what will be the conditions that will have to be met, and how Brazil can tap into that export potential. On the domestic market front, we have a similar issue that I think historically industry players have been eyeing towards Europe as the export opportunity and have potentially underestimated the local Brazilian but also the broader Latin American market as a market for clean commodities, and therefore we don't have the policies in place internally within Brazil, for instance to incentivize the use of lower carbon fertilizers in the agricultural industry. So the market creation locally is also really important. So market is one of the big issues. The second big issue we see, and that's quite contradictory, is actual access to clean energy. Because we've been speaking a lot to date of the fantastic renewable potential of the country. But what we're seeing is that the most mature projects we had in our portfolio just arrived to a halt a month ago because they were refused grid connection. Because the grid, the power system is not set up in a way that it allows for new energy-intensive, heavy industries that will require a massive load to connect to the local grid. So I think those are the two issues I would focus on in terms of challenges to be resolved to unlock investment.
Thanks. And again, here I take in the perspective, Daniel, I know you have also financial background, the cost of capital. We're talking about here the ESG commitments and things like that. That was the question to you, but also taking advantage of the discussion here and as a Brazilian company and investing and a global investor, how do you tackle also the issues of cost of capital, and also how do you use that in order to help the companies to decarbonize their own supply?
Cost of capital is for sure a very important issue in Brazil. We deal with customers globally, but when it comes to Brazil, especially for the middle and small enterprises, it's a big deal how to engage them in this agenda. So, for instance, in our case, we have a sustainable supplier program by which we try to engage our suppliers. And we have so far been able to engage around 900 suppliers out of 7,500 of suppliers of raw materials to WEG. And out of curiosity, 80% of them come from Europe. And we realized that about 50% of the whole supply chain of WEG have, for instance, commitments in terms of reducing CO2 emissions, which is not good enough, right? It's not good enough at all. And the very same number applies to the suppliers here in Europe. So we're trying to bring them to the agenda, but again, when it comes to middle and small companies, it's always more costly, and that's when, again, cost of capital comes to play. In the case of Brazil, BNDES is doing a good job in order to help us out on that, and we expect to have more and more of this in order to move the agenda forward.
Thank you, Daniel. Claudia, come back to you, and again exploring the very important standpoint that you have, and you tackle a little bit the difference between Asia and Brazil. But if you could go deeper a little bit, and some advice for the audience here, and what you see could be important areas, important elements to unblock potential investment and bridge the gaps, even the cost of capital and some of that were mentioned here. Okay.
So maybe first of all, I would say that the sectors in which, and I will take India as an example because I think it's a good comparison with Brazil. That they both can play or are playing in within the climate space is quite similar, but where Brazil has actually some bigger advantages. So one obviously is clean energy. The second is the agri-sector, regenerative agriculture and climate resilient agriculture. And the third would be urban solutions, so water, waste management, recycling, electric mobility, etc. I think the two countries both are playing in different ways. I'll give you a concrete example of, because I was just last week, the entire week doing in India, dedicated to climate discussions with private equity funds and companies. So it was very, and in March I did the same thing in Brazil, so it's very enlightening to do the comparison. So for example, India took the decision less than 2 years ago to ban all imports of solar panels from China. They said it's not enough, they come here, the only thing we do is we assemble them and do the solar installations. We need to move further up the value chain and become a true China plus one. But how do we do that? By reaching scale. And the way to reach scale, yes, it's a very, I could say, dirigiste economic policy, but the result as an investor is that today they've become locally able to compete from a price standpoint with Chinese solar panels. That's one. And we were investors through one of our PE funds in a company called Premier, which manufactures solar panels. We did the most successful IPO in the last 30 years in India, which has the most liquid capital markets in all emerging markets, the Bombay stock market, where we did a return of 40x. I'm not a VC investor, I'm a private equity investor in a solar panel manufacturer. Why? Because there's the demand that was created exactly as you mentioned, local demand, but it was a national decision to say this is a priority for us as a country. Yes, we need to move to renewables, but we need to move in the value chain, so everything else has followed. So now Brazil is a little bit step behind. They're doing solar panel assembly, but nobody's manufacturing solar panels. Could they? Probably, but they would need the right incentives to be able to do so. There's other areas like battery storage, for example, that you were mentioning the grid. We're seeing the same thing. One of the things that is making us nervous is curtailment in the grid right now. And the only way to be able is to invest, in the grid through transformers, upgrade the grid to be able to take more volatile, more unstable renewable energy, but also battery storage. There are companies producing batteries right now with heavy competition from Chinese, but I think it's part of a national policy to also, at what point do you allow that competition if it's not a fair competition, as we saw on the previous slide, meaning scope 2, scope 3 emissions, to, inhibit your own domestic production. So it's, I guess you're saying to be provocative, it's being provocative, that it's a question to be asked, I think. It's not an easy it's not an easy decision, also noting, of course, that China is the first buyer of Brazilian commodities, so it's a difficult choice, but at some point you also need to think, I guess, towards the future, where you want to go as a country. So I do compare both, and I do realize that there's some national decisions that have been made that have boosted some clean sectors, and that have made also, for example, capital markets is another one that I think is very important. The Sao Paulo Stock Exchange, yes, it is the most liquid in Latin America, but it is still relatively illiquid compared to Bombay. So an example I keep hearing from my Brazilian counterparts that to be able to, IPOs have been closed at least for 3 years, but if you want an IPO, you need at least a $50 million EBITDA. That's huge. Well, in India, the equivalent, you have companies with maybe 5 times, 6 times less than that IPOing. So it just, why? Because markets are much deeper, it's much more democratic in terms of the regular Indian white-collar worker invests in capital markets. That is not the case. So they leverage 1.5 billion people, and so there's a lot of liquidity in the markets, and it makes investment incredibly attractive because you know you can get out, and FX is less of an issue. So I think it's a very complex answer, but it means you have to work on multiple fronts. You also have to improve and deepen capital markets. You have to have a more to-the-point economic strategy. Maybe I say this also because I'm also French, so I also think that the state has a role to play in pushing economic policy. But it is, it is striking to see that. For example, in e-mobility, actually, Brazil is doing it the other way from India, which I find fascinating. The Asian way of doing it is through VC, trying to electrify what they call two-wheelers and three-wheelers, so motorbikes and tuk-tuks, basically, because that's the brunt of their traffic in their streets. That's not the case in Latin America at all. So Brazil is doing a different approach. Some really that we've invested in are trying to create from scratch platforms to do urban short-circuit deliveries for all the Amazons of the world, starting with Sao Paulo, but the level of investment is massive. When we were discussing amounts, they were telling me we're going to buy 20,000 medium-sized trucks for Sao Paulo. That's only that is $300 million of investment. And if I want to go from Sao Paulo to Rio, to Bogota, to Mexico, to Buenos Aires, it's billions. So I guess it's capital and policy.
No, and Claudia, thanks a lot here for the conference, for being very provocative also, and I'm sure we're going to have several of the topics for future agendas of the Brazil Climate Summit. Okay, so very, and Faustina, I think building a little bit on the things also you mentioned on the short-term effect. I think that in Brazil, maybe for the long term, we're good at planning. Okay, so I think we're very proud of our power system, integrated system that was built in like 70 years and anything like that. Okay, but these announcements and these projects and the hydrogen and large demand, it's in there for 5 or 6 or 5 years, 5 years at least. And now when you get to Rio, as the connection, there are some. So I'd like you to explore how to overcome that, and also to mention how they influence the key projects that's part of the ITA. Okay.
So it is very challenging to get that series of first-of-a-kind projects financed, because you both have to go for quick wins and resolve the structural issues at the same time. And the structural issues generally take a long time to be resolved. And so managing those tensions is a difficult task. And I see, and we're operating in Brazil, we're operating in the Middle East and North Africa and India as well. The approach we see in the Middle East is very different than the approach we see in Brazil. And it's highly focused on quick win interventions, exceptional circumstances negotiated directly between companies and with government to make the conditions right for that first of a kind, regardless of what happens for the rest, while progressing at the same time the structural reforms that will benefit the longer tail of projects. I think in Brazil, we're seeing a much greater focus on addressing the structural issues, but then that prevents those first-of-a-kind projects to move as quickly as possible. And to come back to something you said earlier, this is a race, because Brazil is on the line to become a provider of clean commodities to the world, but so is India, so is the Middle East, so is North Africa, so is Australia, which has a history of industrial developments as well. And the European market is big, but it's not that big to absorb all of the projects from all of those regions. So I would strongly encourage government and companies in Brazil to think about the quick wins that can bring some of those first-of-a-kind projects to the front at COP30 and in the following months. Because that's a way to start making or taking the share of a nascent market. And that's important to then be able to build on that to win that leadership race that is starting now.
Excellent, thanks. And then Godinho, if you could share some examples here on effective collaboration between your clients, your global clients, and how they allow your internationalization strategy.
All right, so I'll probably tackle daily business for us, which is to sell efficient electric motors. I'll share a number with you that maybe some of you will be surprised. More than 0.5% of world's consumption of energy comes from electric motors. I'm talking about 53%. So you can imagine the impact of working on efficiency on these motors, right? So the relationship is pretty straightforward. The more efficient the electric motor is, the less consumption of energy it will have and the less emissions of CO2 it will have. So by working on efficiency on a daily basis, we provide our clients with solutions that decarbonize their process and therefore help them achieving their targets in terms of the sustainability agenda. I could also mention a very specific example, like a marine important, it's actually the most relevant company, European company in the world in terms of suction dredgers. And they challenged us to electrify those, and we with an innovative solution, we were able to use electric motors on that, again, decarbonizing their process. But I don't want to miss the opportunity to mention an example here that could be also used worldwide, that is about storage, energy storage. I've just come back from the Amazon region. I was there last week inaugurating a project in a isolated community, where Natura, Brazilian global company of cosmetics, takes most of their raw material from. Most of their raw material comes from the Amazon region. And of course, this region is all, when it comes to energy supply, is 100% dependent upon diesel, right? So we were able to build an agro industry, meaning that the process that would be made in other parts of the country will be now made in the Amazon region. In this project, we estimate that it will raise about 60% of their income. So it's a fantastic social and economic project. But we were able to use a solar system combined with BESS, battery energy storage system, all produced in Brazil. Of course, we don't produce the battery cells there, but we import the cells, but we manufacture the BESS using a national solution in terms of BMS, battery managed system, national converters, and other technologies that combined bring to the region resilience in terms of energy supply, and also, of course, a clean and technological solution. And this could be used not only in the Amazon region, but also in all sorts of isolated communities, in all sorts of off-grid systems all over the world. So this is the kind of things I believe we should be showcasing during COP30 to make Brazil being seen not only as a supplier of commodities, but also in terms of technologies that we do have there and are available not only for Brazil, but also to the world.
I think it's an excellent way to close in here, and I think bringing also on a specific opportunities also that you have with all aligned with all the objectives we seen before. But I think we cover first of a kind, we cover the importance of policy, and I think the importance of also not only looking to our own belly. In Brazil, I think it's very important. I think India is a very interesting case for COP and for everything like that of the cooperation. So I'd like to close here. Now we were talking about football in Brazil. It's not the best moment for football in Brazil. We are importing a coach here from Europe, so Carlo Ancelotti just arrived. So that's a little bit of our globalization here, and I think it's a change of paradigm for Brazil. And of course, thanking a lot here our speakers for the great contribution, and also for keeping the time. Okay, thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for the great discussion. So, hello, my name is Sabrine. I'm also one of the MBA candidates here at INSEAD, helping organize the event. And we'll now turn to a key topic that actually highlights Brazil's unique position when it comes to climate transition. That's agriculture. Brazil has a very unique characteristic. While most of the emissions in other countries come from power and manufacturing, in Brazil, the majority of emissions come from agriculture and land use. So whenever we think about decarbonizing supply chains, we have to understand the challenges and opportunities in this space. What's exceptionally exciting about Brazil is that it proves that it's possible to combine agriculture, food production, and fuel in a sustainable and scalable way. one that could even drive negative emissions in the future. With a mature biofuels industry and strong potential to expand nature-based solutions, Brazil is well positioned to lead the next wave of global decarbonization and serve as a model for the entire Global South. In this session, we'll explore what the leadership looks like in practice, from reducing carbon intensity in agriculture and scaling circular bioeconomy that contribute to global climate goals. And with that, we're honored to have two incredible speakers with us today. That's Bruno Serapião, CEO of Atvos, and Axel Renaud, CEO of Net Zero. And to moderate the panel, Felipe Monteiro, one of our great strategy professors and also academic director at INSEAD, and a leading expert in global strategy and innovation. Thank you, guys.
So good afternoon, everyone. Thanks again, and congratulations to the team organizing this. So I think Michelle and I will talk about kind of listening from the doers and the good examples. I think we have today the opportunity of hearing from two people who are really making a difference in Brazil. And I think, as Sabrina was saying, when we think about agriculture, Brazil is not only the importance of agriculture for climate to the extent of being able to kind of be a leader in biofuels, but also how you have a very sustainable agriculture, more sustainable agricultural practices. So that's basically the tone of this conversation. We're going to have different rounds. And let me start with you, Bruno. So, you know, you represent Atvos, key player in biofuels. You're making important investments on this. Can we just start you giving a brief overview of, you know, what's the role of what you do and what Atvos does in that journey for a more sustainable planet?
So good afternoon, everyone. It's an honor to be here, being an INSEAD alumnus. And I lead Atvos, so we are a large biofuels company. We are the largest one sugarcane-based in the world that's not integrated with distribution. So we have 500,000 hectares of land that we operate. We operate 8 mills, and we distribute ethanol, sugar, and we co-generate 830 megawatts of installed capacity in the circular economy. We employ 11,000 people, 25,000 people in our health plan in 23 different cities in Brazil.
Wonderful. Bruno, and I know quickly, right, you made a recent investment of 10 billion reais on this. I mean, anything that you can share on the latest that you're doing on this?
So what we're doing is we are a biofuels company that looks at the integrated economy. So we found that in our value chain, we do sugarcane, we process sugarcane, and we use the bagasse to generate energy. And from that, we are using also the vinasse, which is a byproduct to produce biomethane. And we're looking at other ways of fixing carbon with CCUS, with biochar, a project with our friend here. So we are basically taking our role of making as much a circular economy that we can. We have to measure the company in two aspects: how much cash we generate and how much carbon do we abate.
Wonderful. So I think maybe biofuels, right, and ethanol, it's something that a lot of us can relate to. You know, Axel, I was watching the video about net zero, right, and I think it's fascinating. I didn't know much about biochar, but you're doing fantastic work on this. So maybe can you kind of explain, you know, how do you take agricultural residues into biochar? What's the role of this? How you can make agriculture more sustainable by doing this?
Yes, very, very happy to be here. Also an INSEAD alumni, so even more happy to be here. Actually, we had a promotion party last weekend, so I'm very much into the INSEAD stuff. So biochar is, in a way, a very stupid product, and it's and also a magical product. Biochar, it's carbon that is extracted and stabilized from biomass. So we use crop residues, like, for example, you know, sugarcane leaves or bagasse, or, you know, but there's a wide range of crops that generate residues. And this, basically, this is CO2 that has been captured through photosynthesis. And what we do is we extract the carbon, we stabilize it, and we turn it into something that, you know, apparently looks a bit like charcoal. It has different chemical properties. And if you bring it back to the agricultural soils, it improves the soil health and it improves the yields. And so it's really an example of turning a waste into a useful product while removing carbon. And so that's what we're trying to bring at scale. It's, in a way, it's an age-old technology, but that is finding a new use for carbon removal and for helping regenerative agricultural practices.
And why Brazil on this? So we could have done this anywhere. I mean, why Brazil?
So the model works better in the tropics. And so if I take my strategy hat, I would say, well, we looked at all the countries in the world, the size, the availability of biomass, GDP, whatever, and we ended up in Brazil. We would have ended up in Brazil, but actually it's a bit different. Through random connections, our COO is Brazilian, one of the co-founders. And so it was natural that we would go to Brazil because he was Brazilian. So it's a mix of, you know, strategy and just, you know, pure luck and serendipity.
And by the way, for those of you who are not familiar with Net Zero, I strongly encourage you to take a look at their website and the videos that they have. So super interesting to see how that model works. But I mean, if I stay with you for a while on this, Axel, one thing is how do you produce kind of more sustainable agriculture? If you go one step further, is, you know, how can you work on carbon capture, and what kind of solutions can you provide on this?
So, you know, we saw the BCG presentation earlier, and it talked about decarbonization. And I think in many people's mind, you need just to reduce emissions. And then at some point, by magic, the world will be net zero, as the term has been coined. And it's not going to be the case. The bad news is there are things that will continue to emit greenhouse gas for a very, very long time. You know, probably, you know, we need more than 100 years to solve, you know, all the sources of emission. Agriculture being a source of emission, especially through because of nitrogen-based fertilizers. And so IPCC says we need, on top of reducing, we need to remove carbon. And for a net zero world in 2050, if we want to follow more or less the Paris Agreement, we need to remove 5 to 10 gigatons per year of CO2. So 5 to 10 gigatons might be a bit abstract to you guys, but if I say the oil and gas sector extracts combined 6 gigatons, it gives an idea of the scale of the industrial challenge. And of course, biochar is not going to do to solve the whole thing. We need a range of technologies, but biochar is the most mature one, can reach 1 to 2 gigaton, which is already kind of a good path into the negative emission target. And so that's really a question of how do you scale that as quickly as possible to allow for those negative emissions first. And the good news is you turn basically a waste, CO2 in our air, into a useful product for agriculture, which, by the way, allows to reduce usage of fertilizers, hence reduce emissions of the agriculture itself. So agriculture, and especially tropical agriculture, and especially in Brazil, can be actually a huge source of negative emissions. And that's a humongous opportunity beyond helping decarbonize through, renewable energy and the likes. So there's, I think for Brazil, this is an enormous opportunity, basically building on its strength, on the strength of its agriculture.
Thank you, Axel. And Bruno, you heard earlier today, right, the ambassador, there were a lot of her bullets which are related to, biofuels and renovables and many of those. So when I think about ATFOS and what you do, right, at the production of ethanol, there's a lot of issues related also. How can you do this increasingly sustainable fashion, right? And how do you reduce carbon intensity? How do you increase circularity? So maybe can you shed us and kind of give us an idea of internally how you're producing, right, that ethanol in the most sustainable fashion?
So, no, thank you, Felipe. So we have to see where we are, right? So for where we are, what we got here. So we only use degraded land. So Brazil has 150 million hectares still of degraded pastures to be used. So you don't need, we can grow the sugar and ethanol industry, by tenfold without chopping down one tree. So this is one of the things that we take a look at. We only use degradable land. We recuperate that land. And when you put a sugarcane through it, you fix 5 to 6% more carbon just for putting it back and just renewing the land. When we look at other things that we do, so we circulate other crops. So after we have a sugarcane crop, we do soybeans. So you also fixate more nitrogen, so we reduce nitrogen use. So there's a land management part. Second thing, Brazil is the country that obliges more reserves in the world. So for you to have a farm in Sao Paulo, you need to preserve 20% of that. If you want to do anything, as north you go closer to the Amazon, it goes up to 90 to, they can use only 10% of the land. So we do that, and we try to have much more reserved land than what's obliged. And the third thing we have is technology. So we use biological fertilizers. We are looking at using, doing partnerships with green ammonia companies that are trying to build, using our own energy that we generate in cogeneration. And this took us to have a 15.9 grams per megajoule in our ethanol, which is today the lowest in Brazil. So, however, we have a plan with the biomethane plant that would take around 4 grams, with the agricultural practices of biochar, of green ammonia, that would get us to the negative front. So in the sense, what Axel is saying is, we don't need just to reduce emissions, we need to have a biofuels that takes carbon out. So every liter of ethanol you put into your gas in your car, 5 years from now, that's from Atvos, you're taking carbon out. So this is how we think about it, and this is how we manage all our investments. So we have announced around 10 billion of investments into building new biofuels, and of course looking at potential new biofuels like sustainable aviation fuel. And to the panel beforehand, the theme has to do with how much you price carbon, how much are companies willing to price it, because economically, if you don't have a different price, it's not gonna fit. And with the cost of capital that Brazil has today at 14.75, it's a huge issue. So in order for us to expand energy generation, core energy generation, we need distribution. However, the hurdle rate for concessions in Brazil today is lower than the interest rate. Therefore, you do not lever the project. So this macro thing needs to be solved. Once it gets solved, you have a huge pipeline of projects coming about. And I think we are in the right way to do that. But managing carbon together with managing the economics of the firm, this is something that we need to do every day. This is part of my job.
Thank you, Bruno. So I think we heard what you do in Brazil, but I mean, I imagine that for a number of people in this room and watching us, they might also be interested, okay, cool things do in Brazil. Can you take this elsewhere, right? How Brazil could be example, right, for the Global South. You talk about other tropical countries. So I know, Axel, you are not operating not only in Brazil, but at some other countries. Can you maybe highlight things that, you know, Brazil can be an inspiration to other countries, some of its idiosyncrasies, anything that you think, you know, might be worthwhile for people looking at Brazil as an example?
Well, I think Brazil is really the place where to start. Because Brazil mixes, you know, we've talked agriculture, but also, you know, technology. And so I think for a new industry, like what we're trying to do, you know, with negative emissions, with biochar, it's way easier to start in Brazil. And so the technology needs to be perfected and brought at scale first before going to more complex countries. A lot of the tropical countries, you see, you know, agriculture, lots of crop residues, even less usage of crop residues than you have in Brazil, because Brazil has already put in place a very efficient model of reusing, you know, the bagasse for energy, for second generation ethanol. And I'm not talking about, you know, all the other crops, but this valorization scheme. If you go to some countries in Africa, or even some parts of India, the only usage of the crop residues is to burn it and then hope the thing will disappear. But the agriculture has a lower productivity, is much more fragmented, and so the model to get there needs to be adapted. And I think Brazil has a strong role to be the initiator, to bring the thing at scale, to allow for the model to be proven, and then you can start to replicate to quote-unquote more difficult countries. And so I think it's a unique opportunity for Brazil to take actually the lead. And maybe 5 years from now, there are ways to operate, also in smaller countries, but we need more confidence on the carbon markets. We need to have gone down on the scale curve for, the technology and the likes. So it's a kind of Brazil can be the breeding ground for those technologies that basically leverage, photosynthesis, I'd say.
Bruno, when you think about biofuels, what's the role of Brazil for the rest of the world?
I think Brazil has an amazing technology for the global south because biofuels is both cheaper and less emission. So sometimes we forget that we're trying to displace fossil fuels. We get into discussions of food and fuel. This is food and fuel together. You do 3 crops. You manage structurally. You have technology in the field that you don't have any more manual work. You have alternative biofuels for the operation. So we're changing all our trucks to biomethane. We have 2 projects with a Brazilian company called MWM that's going to change the engines on the tractors and the harvesters to use our own ethanol. So this is huge when you look at reduction. And when you look at countries like Panama, for example, where we're talking to them, they are importers of oil. So we come in and say, let me export to you ethanol, you reduce CI, and we transfer the technology. We bring in, how do we scale the plant? How do we operate? How do we use GPS to do planting and harvesting? How do we select the clones? We plant 63 different clones of sugarcane. It's not the same. So depending on the type of soil, depending on what is the weather pattern, depending if you harvest it in the beginning, and the middle, of the end. So this is a huge technology that we're talking to local players to come in, to partner with them. And then this would allow us to enhance the market. If you look at the total market for potential ethanol or other biofuels, Brazil produces around 35 billion liters of ethanol. If the blending goes to 2% around the world, this can be tenfold. And with huge impact into life standards because the fuel costs less and emissions. So this is a technology and you don't need investments. When we go to everybody's going electric, just for Brazil, you need to spend around $17 billion on recharging station only to have that adopted in a countrywide stage. So it's not practical. You have to use the same gas stations, have to use the same cars. Just changing the fuel, it's amazing. It's going to solve everything? No, you're going to need several things. We're going to need hydrogen. We're going to need SAF in a way. We're going to need renewable energy in wind, solar. So this is a big chunk of things where biofuels would play a big part in these small countries.
No, and just building on what you were saying, I think we are a bit in a race against time, for all those climate topics. We're actually very late, probably 20 years late. So scaling everything that is available, even if not absolutely perfect, is a huge step. And I think there's a sin to say, okay, let's wait for the next perfect thing that might come along, 20 years from now. But 20 years from now, we're in the wall, I've blown the thing. So scaling ethanol, scaling biochar, scaling what is known, what is available is really the way to go, And then maybe things will come, more fancier things and, and that's the game of, technology and evolution. But we can't wait. And what is proven needs to be scaled. And I think, your example, Bruno, is very good because it's there. There's already, the network, the distribution, the engines and so on. Go for it, full scale.
So we are running out of time, and maybe just to close it, we see a big corporate here, right? A bigger company. We see a more startup. Maybe in 1 minute, what can you do to work with him and what he can do to kind of how corporates and startups can work together on this?
Well, we're in discussion, so.
Very good.
we hope we can get to something. No, but we need, a small startup needs partners to kind of, help start in the journey. So we need funding, we're trying to find funding, and we need partners to have the biomass, who have this alignment in terms of goal, in terms of let's work on decarbonizing as much as possible. And, hopefully we can announce some things maybe a few months from now. But, for us, I think it's very, very important to have, people like you, Bruno, to supporting the journey and helping move from a few sites to something that starts to become at scale. It's a profitable business already. It can be even more profitable in the future, but you need a bit of jumpstart, and I think very like-minded companies like yours and ours, we have probably lots of things to do.
What do you need from startups, Bruno?
No, we need their ideas and their way to do things. We are very slow in large corp, so we set up a CVC that we invest either in equity, but what we try to do is give scale. So we give long-term contracts so they can be bankable if the technology works, and then we have 8 sites. So it takes them off the J-curve right there. And it's great for us to receive any idea of startups. We have Caio here, our BD development, VP of Business Development, that does that for a living, but we don't want to bring that into the company. We want the startup to stay startup, to go fast, to test, so we could use the product and then take the carbon and take some equity out if possible.
Wonderful. So let me thank both of you. It's great to have our alumni coming back, and super proud of what you're both doing. Thank you all, and let's go to the next one. Thank you.
Hello. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lucas Veiga Sacramento. I'm an MBA student at INSEAD. It's a great pleasure to welcome you all to this session. As we gather to explore Brazil's role in building a net zero global economy, few examples capture the intersection of innovation, impact, and profitability as clearly as the story of A10 Invest and Sigma Lithium. This panel highlights a true flagship case of how Brazil can position itself at the heart of decarbonized supply chains. It's a story of transforming one of the world's most strategic minerals into a lever for both climate action and inclusive development. Sigma Lithium is now one of the most important global players in green energy transition. To explore this case, we are honored to welcome 2 outstanding speakers. Marcelo Paiva, co-founder of A10 Invest and co-chairperson of Sigma Lithium, and Professor Henry Grave, chaired professor of entrepreneurship at INSEAD. Please join us.
Great pleasure to see such a lively audience, even at the end of a long session. Hope we can have a good conversation. We're moving from biofuels to electrical vehicles, at the heart of which there'll be the lithium battery. And of course, what the environmentalist will say is that it's wonderful for decarbonization to use the vehicle, but then what about getting the lithium? Isn't that problematic? Well, I think we have one of the exceptions here. Sigma Lithium being a zero carbon footprint and just showing a wonderful example to all of the producers. Now, you got founded in 2016, you acquired the property. This was a while ago, and keywords like ESG and sustainability and the like were not really so present at the time. How did you come up with this type of push as part of your venture?
Okay, so hello everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here, especially being an INSEAD alumnus. So, addressing your point. So yes, we acquired the asset in January 2016, and that was a time that foreign investors were avoiding the mining sector in Brazil, because 2 months before that, there was the worst environmental disaster that has ever happened in Brazil, when we had a tailing dam collapsed that belonged to BHP, to a joint venture of BHP and Vale. And to make things even trickier, lithium at the time was not in vogue, you know. So when you make the push into making the investment, for us, it was clear that mining is a sector that you just can't avoid. And if you are to pursue energy transition, you have to get involved in mining. Yes, there are lots of concerns on the environmental front on the sector, but given that it's a sector that you can't avoid, our mantra was, let's try to do it in the best possible way, in the most sustainable possible way. And we actually addressed, from day one, both the environmental concerns, but also on the social concerns. Because in our view, especially when you are working in emerging markets, you have to address both social and environment concomitantly, and that's how we started, right? So we didn't know everything at once. It was a long learning process, but we had some big do's and don'ts from start. The first don't was that we wanted to avoid tailing dams at all costs, because we just saw what had happened, and unfortunately, tailing dams, they keep being built around the world. And for everyone's knowledge, so what is a tailing dam, right? Basically, when you run a mining operation, those mining operations, they usually use hazardous chemicals, and they reject liquid. So at the end, those liquid rejects, they form a sort of a lake, which is full of those hazardous chemicals, and they stay there forever. So that's problem number one, which is it's a big problem for the environment. Problem number two, which started happening in 2015, is that those tailing dams, they started collapsing, causing tremendous environmental disasters forever. They kill rivers, they kill lives. So we wanted to do things differently on that front. But then we also looked into the social front. That area is one of the poorest areas in Brazil. It's we are located, in an area that there's not that much information, because it's an area that's not densely populated, where people are dying of hunger, where there's no food, no jobs, no nothing. So we decided from day one to be very hands-on with the communities. And we addressed a number of, short-term, mid-term, and long-term measures, right?
So you mentioned a couple of features of the social and economic environment that you're in. And actually, just a few minutes ago, we heard about the cost of capital working in Brazil. Now, being an entrepreneur, I mean, even getting any kind of capital is a challenge. And then there's the problem with cost of capital, and then you're in a specific society where you have to make all sorts of adjustments. I mean, how did you make the decision to go forward, and what were the things you had to do in order to make it all work as an entrepreneurial project?
Yeah. Okay. So our goal when you made the first investments, we looked for backers, but we found none. So we took a lot of risk. It was not that much capital when you think about like figures for big funds, etc. But like but for ourselves, it was like an extremely high commitment. I have to say that like we didn't follow the textbooks when it comes to what you should do or not do. But let's put that aside. As you correctly said, and as people have mentioned quite a lot here, like in the summit, yes, capital is scarce in Brazil. However, in this sector, for search early stage projects, capital is scarce around the world. So yes, in Brazil maybe even more, but and this is a fact that happens up to these days, right? So we took tremendous amount of risk. In the early days, the goal was to survive. Right? All our decisions were done with that mantra. Our first capital raise happened, like a year and a half ago, where basically like we raised money via, I like to say, friends and friends, in the lack of family supporting us, right? And there's a comment that my business partner and I have heard several times throughout our journey, which is that like we got lucky, right? And I like to say that, say for example, when we did our first capital raise, we sold 10% of the company for $2 million. To put things in perspective, like the company now, like is publicly listed at the NASDAQ. At the peak valuation, it reached like a $4 billion valuation. Now, like lithium price crashed. Our market cap is at around $800 million. But when we sold 10% of the company for $2 million, it was extremely hard to raise those funds. So I was trying to share that luck with everyone, right? Like, and I'm also happy to say that, like, as part of like our first round of funding, I had some old INSEAD classmates of mine. So yeah, this network like is very important.
So it helps to be friends with those who have good entrepreneurial projects. I think that's lesson one. But more about lithium. Allow us to understand a little bit about how it's traded. I mean, who are the actors? And there was already talk about clean minerals or clean products. Steel, aluminum were mentioned just now. Possibly getting especially favorable treatment. How does that work for lithium?
So, to start with, I'll say that today there are like two main types of producers. You have the traceable ones and the no traceable ones, right? So when I look into the traceable producers, like the largest producers in the world, they are located in Chile and Australia. We in Brazil, we are the newcomers. It's very important to know that lithium is not rare. So the terminology out there is somewhat misleading. What is tricky when it comes to lithium is that even though it's abundant, there's like pretty much everywhere, it takes at the very least 7 to 10 years to take a project from zero into production in a sector where there is very limited, close to zero capital for such early stage projects, right? That's number one. Number two, it's a very cyclical environment, so it's important to be low cost. And number three, ideally you are sustainable. So when I compare what we are doing in Brazil to current production, like in most like Australia and Chile, I would say that we are doing a very good job. It helps tremendously to be in Brazil, right? Just for a number of reasons. Firstly, if you look into, like on the environmental front, like our carbon footprint on scope 2, like our energy matrix in Brazil is clean and it's cheap. When you look into like producers, say in Australia, energy is much more expensive and they use diesel. Then when I look into like producers, like say in Chile, like the way they produce lithium, it creates quite a lot of problem when it comes to water, because in Brazil and Australia we do mining. In Chile there's something called like brine, where you extract the lithium from the soil, then you form those big natural pools that they have to evaporate, right? So this is within the traceable ones. And so I mentioned like good points about being Brazil. Now, unfortunately, we don't get 1 cent in green premium. We are, I'm very proud to say that worldwide, and that's not just in the lithium space, we are the only large-scale mining company in the world, in any sector, that is net zero carbon. And we don't get a cent more because of that. And there's a cost, there's an additional cost by doing this. Obviously, that we have indirect advantages that clients want to be associated with us. So, for example, right now, we are facing a bear market. Price crashed 80% in the past 2 years. So, in a bear market, even at low prices, some companies won't have demand. They'll build inventories. We have no problems with demand. So that's an advantage that we have. Now, there's a second group of producers, and that's what we call like the non-traceable product. And that's where lies the problem right now. Lithium prices, just going back, just to give like a big picture of the sector and how volatile prices are, right? So from 2017 towards 2020, prices fell by around 60%. Then from 2020, then from 2021 until 23, price went up by 20 times. And from 23 up to now, prices fell by around 80%. It's a very volatile market, right? But prices fell not because of the reasons most people think. People think that, EV market is slowing, that's lack of demand. No, the demand is extremely strong, because if you look into, say, global electric vehicles markets, China accounts for 60% of global sales. And the rest of the world, apart from Europe and the US, 10%. So 7% of the global market is growing very fast. Prices fell because there's a lot of illegal production, unfortunately coming from Nigeria, where we have mines with child labor, zero safety standards, right? And buyers are buying such products, right? So that's where the real competition is right now.
So I think I have a final question, and let me make it a professor question, because why not? Now, you came out of INSEAD, you have the MBA degree. People say often, sort of, education is a bunch of complicators. And to some extent, they're right about it, right? But then there's entrepreneurship, which we often talk about how it simplifies everything. Now, you've talked a lot about how complicated your environment was in. And then you come out of the complicated education also. How do you go through all of this?
So I would say that, since the point that we became fully funded, and right now we are producing, we have revenues, we're generating cash, etc. So yeah, so now we are in this complicated world, but in the first years, it was all about surviving, not going bust.
Simple enough. Yep. Thank you so much.
Hi. Thank you for sharing. With this, we finished the first part of the summit. My name is Sergio Machado, and I'm an MBA student at INSEAD. It's time for all of us to share our thoughts and ideas in the round table. Remember that if your badge has a green sticker, you are signed up for the team reforestation. If your badge has a red sticker, you may go to the hydrogen room. But first, let's take a break. Coffee will be served downstairs on the outside area. And round tables will begin at 4:40 on this floor. Please return promptly to find your room so we can start on time. Also, if you could give us a feedback by scanning the QR code, which will appear in a few moments. And finally, we would be delighted to have you for a reception starting at 6 p.m. to connect and celebrate Brazil Climate Summit Paris 2025. Thank you.